Terrific. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Hello, and thank you for joining us for this informational meeting about the 2026 TV theatrical contract. I'm Pam Greenwald, SAG-AFTRA's Chief Communications and Marketing Officer, and on behalf of all of us, we're thrilled to have you with us today for this important meeting. Before we start, we just want to share a few technical notes. We'll be using the question and answer function in Zoom to field questions. As many questions will be answered during the course of the presentation, we'll turn on the Q&A after the presentation because your question might be answered during what you're going to see and hear. Please, when we open Q&A, submit your questions and using the Q&A button in the palette at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you don't see it immediately, it might be hiding in the little hamburger 3 buttons section. Just click on that. Again, all questions are going to be held until we are near the end of the presentation. And this is important because it allows us to move quickly and answer as many questions directly as we possibly can in the limited time that we have. And we want to get as many answers to as many of you as we possibly can. So again, welcome. And now I'm privileged to turn it over to SAG-AFTRA President and Negotiating Committee Chair, Sean Astin.
Thank you very much, Pam. Hi, everybody. I see more people coming in every moment. So what can I say? The first, as soon as the board voted and put out the word that there was a recommendation for the membership to vote for the agreement, we started doing publicity press calls with journalists. This is way cooler. This is a way better thing, talking to you. I wish I could see you all. Can I see anybody better? I don't think I can. Oh, nope, I can't see it. I can only see us. All right, well, in times past, I've found it frustrating with these webinars because it's like you want to be like at the Palladium in person with a microphone where you can stand up and you can maybe have a little back and forth or something like that. So I apologize that in order to manage the numbers and that we're doing it, I'm not sorry that we're doing it this way, but I'm sorry if people feel like it's not as much fun. What it is an incredibly in-depth contract. So I think, one of the disciplines for us in the negotiating committee was you just have to sit there and listen and listen and listen. So I hope that we get to as many questions as possible, and I hope that the listening isn't, too much. I'm going to read just the first little bit of my intro that I did for the board yesterday, just so you can sort of hear the tone of where I'm at. All right, I want to take a few minutes to frame what I believe this agreement represents in a broad context. It's not entirely a wages and working conditions agreement, though it contains very important, very meaningful gains in both. That couple-month process was not for naught. It informed everything we did. But what I want to express is that it's also a structural agreement, one that attempts to confront the realities of streaming economics, artificial intelligence, digital identity, pension stability, data transparency, and the increasingly fragmented nature of employment in our business. The negotiating committee approached this cycle with a deep awareness that our responsibility was not only to respond to present pressures, but to help position performers to survive and work with dignity in an industry that is evolving faster than at any time in our history. Last little piece here I want to read. There are several areas I believe deserve particular attention. First, the proposed merger framework between the SAG pension plan and the AFTRA retirement fund is historic in scope, the fulfillment of many of a decade-long promise or more. And it's potentially transformational for the long-term stability of our members. Second, the AI provisions that we achieved substantially expand upon the protections we got in 2023. They include explicit protections for digital replicas created without scanning. It includes stronger consent standards, biometric protections, strike protections, and important new limitations involving synthetics. You'll get into that. Third, the agreement continues the work of modernizing streaming compensation through improved residual structures. That sentence doesn't quite capture it. It's big. It includes expanded transparency obligations on part of the streamers and the increased success bonus funding, which is tied to actual viewership performance. Fourth, and this one is really important, I hope, for this group here, the contract attempts to bring humanity to a broken casting system by widely offering live Zoom readings to actors who are invited to audition, so that you can have real interactions with casting directors, reading with people who are familiar with the material, and maybe the tech lift isn't as hard on our side. Finally, there are meaningful improvements for background actors, recurring performers, stunt performers, dancers, singers, young performers, and series regulars. Many of these are addressing quality of life issues that members have raised consistently, cycle after cycle. So I'll leave it there. I want to make sure that the way you're communicated to is with respect, um, and not just trying to like sell you on something. Um, but I'm proud of this agreement. We worked really hard on it. Your negotiating team was tireless, both our volunteer performer leaders and the staff as well. I don't know if it's really if people really understand who's working for us, the contract staff, the lawyers, the economists, the logistics people. It's really a full-on process for a big organization, and it was great to be able to chair it. And I would just say finally about um, you always want to hear in these stories like how did it go? What was going on? What was the back and forth? Did anybody get angry? They showed up. Greg Hessinger, who used to work for us in the early 2000s for a brief time as executive director of SAG, and I think also as an AFTRA executive director, he showed up with a wildly different approach from his predecessor. He came in speaking respectfully, constantly using language of inclusion, just understanding that, they'll get a lot further with honey than they did with whatever they were doing before. So, yeah. So with that, and you'll see that reflected in the agreement. This agreement includes so many things, but it also includes a number of items that have to do with ongoing communication with them for verticals, for example, the language we achieved with verticals. And I would say that, taking the word of companies when you're in a bargaining thing is, it's a hard thing to do because they have their interests and we have ours. But I will say, as far as I'm concerned, they were operating in goodwill. And I'm confident that as the term of this contract unfolds, Duncan and the staff and others will have the ability to communicate with them in good faith. Doesn't mean we'll get everything we want, but they're on the record with a bunch of these things, and that's important, saying they're going to talk to us. All right, so allow me now to, there's so much to say, I'm just going to like stop talking, but I want to announce or introduce Duncan Crabtree Ireland, who is our National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator. I hope I said that right. Duncan was, you know, predictably on point throughout this negotiation. And I would just say, Duncan, as I introduce you, the one word, if I had to pick one word to describe you and Ray and Jessica and all the people in our group through this process is creativity. Every time there was an impasse when they didn't want to do something and we weren't ready to give it up, or we were still fighting. You guys always kept going back to the well, looking for a different way of accomplishing things, and you really benefited the members in important ways day in and day out. And so I'm very proud to have worked with you, and I'll turn it over to you to address the members.
Wow, thanks so much for that, Shauna. That's very kind words and much appreciated. And I really want to thank you and all of the committee members who participated in this negotiation. This was a huge, huge undertaking. I know you knew that when you took on this job because you were on this committee for the prior negotiations in 2023 and the strike. But it's one thing to be on the committee; it's another thing to chair the committee. And you, your vice chairs, and all of the committee just devoted countless, countless hours and also showed incredible flexibility when we had the opportunity to come back and get an extra week of bargaining time. And it turned out that that extra week of bargaining time was what we needed in order to bring the contract home. So I just want to thank all of you and acknowledge how incredible and effective you've all been. And your leadership in particular, Sean, has been extraordinary. And it's a true honor to work with you. I also want to thank our negotiating negotiating staff, Ray, Jessica, who you just mentioned, and the entire host of people who bring their expertise and their diligence and their caring about negotiations. And, I'm proud of them not only because of how great they are, but I think members who work with them know that our team does it because they care about our members and because they love the work, not for any other reason. And that really means that it is it's a job, but it's also something that we're really passionate about. I also want to thank the members who showed up for the W&W process. It was your incredible commitment of time, energy, and sharing your experience under the contract that really helped us formulate the proposals. It shaped the contract. And if you've already looked at the summary, which is on the website, you will see that there's like 56 major items included. This was a vast package that was informed by what you all told us in the W&W process. And the gains that have resulted from the negotiations are thanks to your insight and your input. President Aston, Sean mentioned the National Board voted to send the agreement to you. The National Board has recommended ratification, and I know we want to get right to it so that we can talk about the details of it. I do want to just share a couple of insights in addition to what Sean shared with his highlights from the agreement. From my point of view, one of the biggest accomplishments of this negotiation is the long sought after merger of the SAG pension plan and the AFTRA retirement fund. I know folks will have a lot of questions about that. It's something we've been working to find a pathway to achieve since 2012 when we merged the plans. It's been 14 years. Despite a lot of efforts, we haven't yet found that path until this negotiation, and now we do. That path is laid out in the agreement, and looking forward to talking about it. The upshot of it, of course, is that when this agreement is ratified, if it's ratified and when it takes effect, the problem of split earnings for our members, which affects hundreds and hundreds of members every year, will be gone, and people who've missed out on qualifying for pension or retirement credit will be able to do that in the future. Another one that I just want to mention, I mean, I agree with the whole list that Sean mentioned, but very excited about the fact that we were able to secure coverage for choreographers in this agreement. They've been wanting it for decades. They've been actively pursuing it for maybe 10 years or so. And as part of that sort of new respectful vibe that Greg and the AMPTP has brought, they have agreed to cover them, and will now have a new Schedule J Part 2 to cover choreographers in their terms. So this is just very exciting, and it's an example of some of the out-of-the-box proposals that stretch across all the different member categories, to residuals, to AI, of course. We'll talk about that. There's a lot in this agreement. Before we start, though, the presentation, I also want to note that in case any of you have to leave early before we get to questions, or if you think of a question after the webinar is over that you need to get answered, I want to let you know that you can email us with any follow-up questions you might have after the meeting, and someone will respond to your email and get you an answer. And that email address is tvtheatrical2026@sagaftra.org. So tvtheatrical2026@sagaftra.org. And we'll remind you of that at the end as well. But I just wanted to make sure to mention it now in case anybody had to leave early. And of course, if you do have to leave early, there are other info meetings. There's one tomorrow. There'll be others later on in the process, and all of that will be available for you on the website as well. So let's go ahead and get on into it. I am super pleased and honored to turn the presentation over to SAG-AFTRA's own Chief Contract Officer, Ray Rodriguez, and to our National Director of Entertainment Contracts, Jessica Johnson. Ray was the co-lead negotiator with me on this contract, and Jessica was like the third in that trio, running the negotiations throughout the process. She played an incredible integral role, and I'm super appreciative and proud of both of them. So going to hand it over to you, Ray and Jessica, to deliver the presentation, and I'll just pop back in here and there to add a little color commentary as appropriate. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Duncan. And Jessica and I are going to trade off as we walk through this PowerPoint presentation. And let's go ahead and get started. All right, let's talk about the term. It's a 4-year term. As you heard, it's from July 1st, 2026 to June 30th of 2030. And you'll see there is a ratification date of July 1st or the first Sunday following. If we follow the ratification schedule that has been laid out by the board, this will all be ratified by July 1st. And so July 1st will be the effective date. Next slide. We have 3% increases in each of the 4 years of the agreement compounded. The network primetime rerun ceilings are going to be steadied for this term, and there are allowances and adjustments that will be changed, but those are specifically called out, and otherwise they will remain the same. Next slide. The SAG-AFTRA health plan will get an additional 1% to the contribution rate effective in the first year of the deal. Along with that, there will be a joint recommendation to the trustees to adopt a one-time increase to quarterly premiums, and it's about a 4% increase, but there are whole numbers in your summary if you want to see what those increases are. And to an additional 1% increase for each of the 4 years of this deal for the earned eligibility threshold. That's what you have to meet to qualify. They go up automatically by 2%, but for this term, it will go up by an extra 1%, so it will go up by 3%. The alternative days means of qualification, which is relevant to background actors, that's going to be frozen, so that's not going to go up. As well, the trustees are going to evaluate if that needs to be adjusted. Next slide. Now we get to talk about merger. Both Sean and Duncan, I think, both mentioned that one of the signature achievements of this tentative agreement is a plan for merging the SAG pension plan and the after retirement fund. That's going to begin with us convening a committee that includes not only the AMPTP and SAG-AFTRA, but several of the other employer groups, the networks, the record companies, who are contributors to one or the other of these plans. And we're going to convene that to reach an agreement on merger. There is an interim funding process that calls for essentially all of the funding under the or all of the contributions under the theatrical codified basic and the television agreement will end up going to the pension plan, with the exception of programs that are currently contributing to the after retirement fund prior to the effective date of this agreement. For any existing seasons of series, those will continue generating contributions to the after retirement fund. Everything else will go to the pension plan, and as part of the adjustment for that, there will be a 2% reallocation of contributions due to the pension plan to the retirement fund, so they both remain funded during this interim process. All of that will cease to be relevant at the point of merger, where all the assets of both plans will come together. So that's how we're dealing with interim funding. As far as benefit accruals and vesting during the merger process, if you're working under an agreement that's contributing to the pension plan, you will continue to accrue and invest in the pension plan. Same thing if you're working on a program that's contributing to the retirement fund. And obviously, all of the agreements outside of the codified basic and TV contract that we're talking about that contribute to one or the other plan will keep doing so. The only wrinkle is that if you are working under the SAG television agreement and you have less than 5 years of vesting service in the after retirement fund, but you have at least 3 years, one of which was earned in the prior 5 full plan years, then there's going to be a provision for you to get vesting credit in the retirement fund for the work that you do under the television agreement. And this is to accommodate different break-in service rules that the retirement fund has, as well as not stop anyone's progress to vesting because a new season of a retirement fund contributing show is now switching to the pension plan. So that's a protection against that. That's how we're going to handle the interim vesting and accruals. Once the merger happens, the target date there is January 1st, 2028, then we will get a 1% increase in the contribution rate to that merged plan. So it will have immediate additional funding. And at the same time, the amount of money that you have to earn to vest a pension credit is going to increase. So there will be a $2,000 increase from $20,000 to $22,000 effective January 1st of 2028, and then a second $2,000 increase to $24,000 effective January 1st, 2030. And just to note, those will be the first increases to that vesting amount in quite a long time. When it comes to benefits under the merged plan, once we get to the merged pension plan, it's kind of the best of both worlds. You'll have this pension plan accrual and vesting and benefit provisions. However, you will have the maximum benefit amounts from the after retirement fund, which are higher. So that means that pension plan participants are going to see their maximum pension go up by 12.5%, and retirement fund participants are going to see the rate at which they can accrue a pension basically double. So it's really a best of both worlds in terms of the benefits under the merged plan. There is a limitation to the ability of the trustees to make further improvements to those benefits during the term of the agreement. They won't have that authority during the term of the agreement. And then afterwards, the plan will need to project green zone for the full projection period, assuming a 7% rate of return, or if it has adopted a lower rate of return, whatever that is, before benefits can be improved further. As far as contributions to the merged plan, once the plan is merged, all of the contribution obligations to either the retirement fund or the pension plan will be redirected into the merged plan. There is a provision that if during the term of the agreement that merged plan is not projected to remain in the green zone as defined by the Pension Protection Act for at least 15 years, and the health plan at the same time has at least 15 months of reserve, bearing in mind that the target there is 9 months, so 15 months is quite a lot, then the allocation of contributions between the health plan and the pension plan will be readjusted such that that reallocation results in the health plan having 12 months of reserves for the next 3 years. That provision is unlikely to be triggered, both because there has been extensive work done by our actuaries, and we fully anticipate that the merged pension plan will be in the green zone. And accruing 15 months of reserves in the health plan is also relatively unlikely, but it is there in the agreement, so we want to explain it. With regard to the target ratio, some of you may recall that in 2014 we agreed to a target ratio of 57% of contributions to pension, 43% to retirement. And we had a mechanism that assigned different genres of programming to one or the other plans. That didn't work very well, so we are eliminating that target ratio. We had proposed to study a different methodology to achieve the same thing that will no longer be necessary in the context of a merged plan. And so that study provision is also going to be eliminated. And finally, we did agree to an expansion of side letter K. Side letter K allows for a discounted contribution rate on the pilot or presentation and first 2 seasons of a new 1-hour show. And we agreed to expand that on the same basis to half-hour programs. Next slide, please.
Ray, before you go on, I just want to add, if I may, because I want to make sure this is really clear to everybody, that for anybody who has an accrued, this is Duncan, by the way, I don't know if you can see me. For anybody, there we go. Hi. For anybody who has an accrued invested benefit in either plan or in both plans already, nothing about the merger of the plans will diminish, reduce, or change those accrued or vested benefits. So I just want to make sure that it's very, very clear that everything that you have worked for or have accrued or you have achieved in your participation in either or both of those plans to date, that's fully protected going forward. And everything that Ray's just been talking about in the merge plan would be for the going forward period starting in January 1, 2028, except for the parts that we're talking about the interim period. So just the key message is if you have a pension now, or if you've accrued or you're working towards that and you vested, all of that is protected going forward and none of your benefits would be diminished at all by this process. Thanks.
Yes, important point. Next slide talks about the logo. One of the things that we achieved in
Duncan, right, before we jump off of that topic, are you there? Am I allowed to butt in?
Yeah, we can hear you, Sean.
Yeah, I just want, is there anything else you can say for folks with regard to, uh, the merger, the way it's happening, not just as you know what I mean, right? Like, I just want people to understand that both of these things have a history. The interplay between them has a history, and this moment is meant to, chart a path forward, out of some of the things that people have not felt comfortable about. And I just want you to say a little bit of something like that before you guys move on, if you don't mind.
Sure, sure. No problem. Happy to do that. I think part of probably what you're referring to is the fact that, there have been concerns raised over the years about contemplating a merger of the SAG plan and the after retirement fund. Among the concerns that have been raised, number one are, is it sustainable? Are the sufficient resources there in both plans to make this viable going forward? I want to just assure everyone we've had actuarial analyses done on both plans separately and also on the merged plan that assure that the merged plan will be in solid financial shape. It'll be in the green zone under the Pension Protection Act for the entirety of its projected future existence. It will, while both of the existing plans are not quite fully funded, both of them are in the low 80 percentile or low 80 percentage funded right now. The merged plan is projected to reach 116.5% funded by 2040, and in fact will cross over into more than 100% funded by 2035 under the projected terms of this deal. And I also want to just note that there are folks who have raised concerns about what about the other contracts that contribute into these plans, because obviously we're talking about the TV theatrical agreement, but other contracts contribute in, and some of them have different contribution rates, different contribution caps. And so I do want to just let everybody know that the National Board has already adopted a resolution that if this proposal goes forward upon the ratification of this agreement, that it will become a directive from the National Board that all of our negotiating committees across all of our contracts will make it a top priority to ensure that contributions are delivered equitably to the plan so that all contracts are doing their fair share to support the future merged single pension plan. And that means that contribution rates may need to be bargained up in some contracts. That needs to take into account caps, because rates are not the only thing. There's also a question of caps and other factors related to that. But we're very mindful of that, attentive to it. I've already given directive to our staff negotiators to carry that out as well. So anyone who has concerns along any of those lines wanted to really make sure you had that information so you can factor it into your thinking. Sean, was there anything else that you were wanting to make sure we covered? Because that's
No, I'm sorry to have butted in. I just know that this
no,
is
no.
an item that is a hot topic, and what
Yeah,
you're
it's a good one.
describing there is bringing into alignment the contribution rates and the what you said, the equity of the way they're done, and this is a moment where that can be achieved, and it'll take time, right? It'll take some number
Right.
of
It will
years, I'm sure.
probably take time. It could take 1 to 2 bargaining cycles, maybe even more in some really tough contracts. But if we make it a top priority, obviously we have to navigate employers who might be resistant to that. But it is definitely an achievable goal. And I do want to just emphasize that that's important from an equity perspective. But I also want to emphasize that the people who are participating in this, they're not individually responsible for bargaining these rates. This is something that's the union's responsibility. It's a responsibility we take on with enthusiasm, and it is, it is going to be, I think, a really good thing to make sure that all of our members can benefit from retirement on the same terms, and it is absolutely economically sustainable. And in fact, the resilience of the plan will be even greater with the combined assets of both the after retirement fund and the SAG plan together. So it's a very exciting opportunity that's fleshed out by the additional contributions that the employers are going to make, as Ray, I think, had mentioned already. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. The dynamic of needing to divert some money from one plan into the other goes away because this will be a unified plan. So
Right. I mean,
I'll stop talking now.
I mean, a diversion, it's a diversion for a very brief period, and then all of the money comes right back together into a single plan that goes forward into the future stronger and with a much larger asset pool, more diversification in terms of the sources of contributions. So there's a lot of exciting elements to that I think when people really sit down and take a look at it, will help give them confidence that this is a very positive step for both of the plans and all of our members and the plan participants.
All right. Continuing on, we'll talk about the logo on this slide. This is one of the things that we have been trying to do for a long time, is get our logo added, and in this cycle we achieved it. An inadvertent failure is not grievable, but there is a requirement now to display the SAG-AFTRA logo. Next slide, please. For background actors, we have a great number of achievements for background actors. A number of achievements in the area of Schedule X parity. Our background actors, it's the only area of work in our contract where there are different terms geographically. So we have the East Coast and West Coast zones, and we have brought them closer together, including by adding to Schedule X1 an increase from $518 to $580 for swimmers and skaters, an increase for driving animals, more than 2 animals by $10 each for each 2 animals, clarifying that photo doubling is a special ability and that there is an extra $10 adjustment for it that's now been included in Schedule X1. The waiver provision for scenes involving undirected large crowds is automatic now in X1. For wet snow and smoke, there's a requirement to provide a private place now in X1 to change it to dry clothes at mealtime and dismissal. For travel on a consecutive day or holiday, the time and a half begins now after 10 hours instead of after 12. And when a meal is not catered or not available within 5 minutes walking, the meal period has to be 45 minutes. So those are all the elements that we were able to harmonize between X1 and X2, leaving very few remaining differences. In the area of minimum coverage caps, right now, a feature-length piece of content made for a streaming service is treated as television, and it has the television numbers, coverage cap numbers associated with it. For features 85 minutes or longer with a budget of at least $30 million, that's going to change now in this contract, and those productions are going to attract the higher theatrical caps, which are much higher. So that's a creation of jobs for background actors. And then the TV caps are going to increase to 26 in the first year of the deal and to 27 in the third year of the deal. So there will be 2 new positions added in television. We have a provision now that you must receive a preliminary call time by 8 p.m. to address concerns of background actors who were finding that they didn't know at the time that they went to bed at night when they would have to work in the morning. The body makeup provision that talks about additional compensation when you have body makeup or oil applied to more than half your body, that's gone up from $19 to $21.50. Allowances have gone up for wardrobe, for automobile allowances, for motorcycle allowances, for police motorcycles. All of those allowances have increased, and we got clarity that folks are going to be reimbursed for tolls and congestion pricing, which is a particular concern for our New York members. As far as submission for employment, you cannot be charged a fee for access to casting notices. For late fees, we got an increase to late fees from $3 to $5, so that the X1 cap is now $125 for those late fees. So that's an increase there. For transportation after night work, this is really for our New York members, Grand Central Station is now a required drop-off point. Therefore, you will have the ability to be dropped off on either the east side or the west side and will not have to be dropped off and then go crosstown. For purposes of stand-in double duty, that's another item where we have been trying to get recognition of the burden and the work associated with having a background actor be required to also do stand-in work or vice versa. And in recognition of that, there is a new $27 adjustment when that circumstance happens. For reporting very early in New York City, we have largely been successful to this point in obtaining some kind of safety ride for folks so they don't have to use public transportation that early in the morning. and the producers have agreed to continue their current practice in that regard. Finally, with respect to nudity, we achieved a provision that stand-ins may not work nude or simulate sex acts. This did happen to some stand-ins during the term of this agreement that generated this. And I will note here that it is our position, and we would be prepared to litigate on this basis, that nudity, that partial nudity is included in nudity. So folks should not feel that they have to be completely nude before this protection is triggered. Partial nudity will also trigger it. Next slide, please. A number of improvements in the area of casting. So in addition to the self-tape provisions that we negotiated in the prior cycle about not being charged to submit self-tapes, we now have a prohibition on being charged to submit a headshot or a reel. We have an understanding that if there is a casting service that adopts terms of service that are not consistent with the AI language in our contracts, that the AMPTP will coordinate with us in pressuring that casting site to change its terms of service. This already happened once, and the union was able to, by itself, get that changed. But with the AMPTP also helping, we think we'll be better positioned to do that. We achieved a prohibition that casting notices available concurrently in multiple geographic markets have to seek to fill the role at the same level. Something of great importance to our members, particularly outside of Los Angeles and New York. It means that you cannot cast for the role as a guest star in Los Angeles and as a co-star in Atlanta. And if you change the level at which you're casting the role, you have to change it everywhere where that casting notice is active. For use of audition or an interview recording, this includes a self-tape, or if they record your live audition, they're limited to using that for casting purposes only. And if they want to release that publicly, they have to get your consent. They have to do it at the time of use. So it cannot be made any kind of condition of your ability to audition that you agree to that. For virtual interviews or auditions, we made a tremendous inroad here in the availability of virtual interviews. Producers have now committed that for casting series regulars, recurring roles, major role performers, modified deal performers, and modified guest performers, that they are going to make a good faith attempt to accommodate everyone that wants a virtual interview. We did receive a lot of feedback during the wages and working conditions process that people were not able to access the virtual interviews that were provided for in the 2023 deal. So we have bolstered, expanded, and strengthened that commitment on the part of the producers to make those alternatives available for folks who would prefer not to self-tape. Next slide, please. Choreographers, you also heard this mentioned at the top of the meeting. We have succeeded in obtaining voluntary recognition from the AMPTP of us of this union as the representative of choreographers. They will be included in the codified basic under a new Schedule J Part 2. Their rates will remain negotiable for the term of this agreement. They will, however, have mandatory pension and health contributions based on the solo duo dancer rate, and they will have certain terms that are incorporated from the dancer schedule and Schedules A and B to provide basic terms for choreographers. So new category for us.
Ray, before you jump to the next thing, can you just go back to casting for a second and let folks know that people who prefer to send in their self-tapes are still permitted to do that, so people don't think that the system has been completely redesigned against their preference?
Sure. Yes. I mean, we expect that people will still be requested to self-tape, and you will still have that option. And I think the changes that we made were meant to accommodate those who prefer not to self-tape, but not to prevent those. We know that there are members who prefer to self-tape. Those members can continue to submit their self-tapes. They do not have to avail themselves of a virtual interview. They don't want to. Next slide, please. And from here, I will let Jessica take over, starting with dancers.
Thanks, Ray. Hi, everyone. Picking up with this item on dancers, we were able to eliminate the group 9+ rates. So that means the current group 3 to 8 rates would become group 3+ rates. So that's an improvement for group dancers. On dancer hazard pay, we were able to increase the rate of pay from $100 to $110, or if it's one day only, from $125 to $135. Additionally, during the negotiations for the network code, the networks had agreed to meet with SAG-AFTRA during the term of that agreement to discuss safe rehearsal and working conditions, including resilient flooring and hazardous working conditions, and how best to handle some of these issues that arise for dancers. In the course of this negotiation, the AMPTP has agreed to join in that discussion, so we can have all of the parties together having the conversation at the same time. A few topics here for you. On the topic of data transparency, the producers have agreed to provide viewership data measured by the same criteria as the success bonus in order for us to track that more accurately. For project information sheets, when the producer provides information to the union about an episodic content that they're going to be producing, they'll indicate whether it's a series or a multi-part closed-end picture, which is just the contract term for a mini-series. This will avoid the producer using some term like limited series that creates confusion as to which contract provisions apply. There is a confidentiality agreement that goes along with new media license inspections, and the attorneys for the union will meet with the attorneys for the AMPTP to make some modifications to that confidentiality agreement during the term of this agreement. On disability accommodations, we've achieved confirmation that performers will be provided with written information for requesting disability accommodations prior to their employment. If it's not practicable to do it prior to employment, it will be done at the first opportunity to do so. This might be that the contact information for requesting the accommodation will be included on the start paperwork, but this will be provided proactively to performers so that they know how to request those accommodations when needed. Additionally, during the term of the agreement, the parties have agreed to form a committee to discuss accessible casting practices and accessible sets, including accessible changing areas. That committee will discuss whether there's any bulletins that could be issued that will help improve the experiences of performers on set with respect to accessibility. On financial assurances, we worked with the producers to update some form agreements that are in the contract, including the distributor's assumption agreement and the buyer's assumption agreement. These forms are used when another party comes in and obtains rights in a project, and it brings them on as an additional liable party that will take on some of those responsibilities like residuals. On the topic of fittings for day performers, there's a money break in Schedule A, over which performers are not entitled to any additional payment for fittings on a day prior to a workday. We have increased that money break from $1,500 to $1,700 in this tentative agreement. And for background actors, we've increased the minimum call for a fitting from 2 hours to 3 hours. On the topic of contact lenses, there were some concerns from performers that they were being required to use contact lenses that weren't fitted for their specific eye measurements. So we have an agreement here that anytime a principal performer or background actor will be required to wear specialized contact lenses, they'll have the opportunity to have personalized lens measurements, and the only lenses they'll be required to wear are lenses that are made to fit those measurements. The time spent in the contact lens fitting will be treated just like a fitting. A couple of things on the topic of holidays. First is what happens when you work past midnight and you go into a day that's a holiday. Under this tentative agreement, we've clarified consistent language across the various schedules to confirm that for day performers, weekly performers, and background actors, any hours worked after midnight into a holiday will be entitled to double time for work on the holiday. Additionally, we've provided a provision on holiday swaps. This occurs when a production is shooting outside of the US and production is seeking to observe the local holiday instead of the American holiday. Under this provision, a producer could exchange a contractual holiday except for Christmas for a local holiday so long as the two holidays are within 60 days of each other. Further, both holidays have to be within the term of the performer's engagement so they get the benefit of the holiday day. And both the performer and the union have to get noticed at least 2 weeks in advance, unless the performer is hired less than 2 weeks before the first holiday, in which case the notice would be at the time of hire. On the topic of intimacy coordinators, the parties have agreed to form a committee during the term of the agreement to explore the feasibility of developing an industry-wide resource for conducting background checks of intimacy coordinators. Additionally, with respect to background actors, the producers have confirmed that just like for principal performers, they would use best efforts to engage an intimacy coordinator for scenes involving nudity or simulated sex acts with background actors. And anytime a production has engaged an IC, if a background actor would like access to the IC, they can request that access without any fear of retaliation. For late payment liquidated damages for principal performers, we've increased the time period during which the $10 per day late pay damage can accrue from 20 days to 25 days. That means the maximum violation increases from $200 to $250. For major role performers, there's currently an exception that allows a major role performer engaged for 1 day only to be hired under what's called the 1 day exception. The minimum for the 1 day exception is scale. Under this agreement, the minimum for the 1 day exception would increase to scale plus 10%. This makes no changes to a major role performer that works more than 1 day. Just has always been the case. If a major role performer works more than 1 day, it triggers the full major role guarantee of 5 days on a half-hour program and 8 days on a 1-hour program. For meals, if production's not going to provide food on set, meaning there's going to be a walkaway meal, the producers will notify principal performers and background actors the night before. This doesn't change any of the rules about when a producer is or is not required to provide meals. It's just about notice so that performers and background actors know if they need to, bring a lunch or bring money to buy their lunch the next day. On the topic of meal penalties, for both principal performers and background actors, there's currently 3 tiers of meal penalties. When you get to the 3rd tier, that amount applies for every half hour subsequent to the 3rd half-hour violation. Under this setup, we've added a 4th tier of meal penalty that kicks in at the 5th violation. So the current 3rd tier would still apply to the 3rd and 4th half hour, but if you go into a 5th or later half hour, the penalty would be increased to $75 per half hour for principal performers and $15 per half hour for background actors. You may recall in recent contract cycles, we've added a form of engagement called the modified deal performer or the modified guest performer. The way that engagement works under both the modified deal performer and modified guest performer form of engagement is that for every episode that you're engaged on, it's a multiple of the number of work days. So it's a certain number of work days times the number of episodes, and the overall work period is a certain number of calendar days times the number of episodes. For the current modified deal performer and modified guest performer forms of hiring, we've achieved a cap of 180 days on the overall number of work days, regardless of the number of episodes on which you're hired. So for example, under the current modified deal performer provision, if you're engaged on 10 episodes as a modified deal performer, the overall work period could be 300 days. Under this new provision, it would be stopped at 180 days, even though you're engaged on the 10 episodes. We've also created a new half-hour version of the modified deal performer and modified guest performer. The existing modified deal performer and modified guest performer is still available to producers of half-hour shows, but they have this additional option that has a number of days that's a little more consistent with how half-hour shows work. So under the half-hour modified deal and modified guest performer approach, for a modified deal performer, the rates will start at $19,846 and increase with the general wage increase. This will buy 8 workdays times the number of episodes that you're guaranteed, on an overall period of 24 days times the number of episodes you're guaranteed, but in no event more than 144 days. The half-hour modified guest performer provision will start at $12,899 and increase with the general wage increase. The number of workdays will be 6 days times the number of episodes, and the overall production period will be 18 days times the number of episodes, but no more than 144 days. Finally, the producers have agreed to include all of the modified deal performer and modified guest performer rates on the rate sheet that's issued. In the last term, there's been some confusion by some producers as to what the rates are, so this will avoid the confusion by putting it clearly in writing.
Jessica?
Yes.
Can you just explain the basic problem that we were trying to solve with that, just so people get a sense? Because there's a lot of detail, but I hope people to just get a sense of what it was, what the problem was.
Sure. So the modified deal performer and modified guest performer forms of engagement were really, were created to speak more to the nature of production as it's changed in recent years. So I think, as we all know, crossboarding has become really common, and so these forms of hiring allow producers to utilize performers on multiple episodes, intermingle which episodes they work on the work days, without dealing with some of the traditional consecutive employment rules. The benefit to the performers is that it's higher rates, and also on the days that you're not working, so the dates that don't fall into that work dates category, you're totally free to take other jobs. You're not in first position. You are free to take other employment on anything other than the work days. The problem that we were seeing, though, is that producers were using this form of engagement for performers working on a lot of episodes. Working on a lot of episodes is a great thing, but when the overall span period was stretching out so long that it was longer than you could ever even need to film a season of a television show, we identified the problem of wanting to put a cap on that. So even if you're engaged in a lot of episodes as the modified deal performer or modified guest performer, the producer doesn't need all of that span time. So the caps on the span time help deal with that problem by putting an absolute limit, even if you're engaged in a lot of episodes under this form of hiring. But also we created these new forms of hiring to hopefully provide more opportunities for performers to work that also work with the way that producers are scheduling productions in the current environment. All right, the topic of money and schedule breaks. Money and schedule breaks, if you're not familiar with them, money breaks are dollar amounts throughout the contract that when you're guaranteed above that dollar amount, something different might happen with how you're paid or what the producer is entitled to. There are some overtime money breaks in Section 25 of the television agreement. We've increased these money breaks for the various forms of employment under this section. So for 3-day performers, we've increased it from $3,150 to $3,800 effective July 1, 2026. For weekly performers, it's currently at $4,400. We've increased that to $5,200 on July 1, 2026 and $5,750 on July 1, 2028. The multiple picture form of engagement for stunt performers is a little different. If you're not familiar with it, this form of hiring allows a stunt performer to work on multiple episodes of a show in the same week for a higher weekly rate. Because that's a higher weekly rate, it didn't really work with the current money breaks in the agreement, so we were actually able to create an entirely new set of money breaks that are specific to the multiple picture stunt performer. So those would start at $5,300 and then go up to $5,750 on July 1, 2027 and $6,200 on July 1, 2029. Throughout Section 25, there is, the math is done for what the double time rate is at those money breaks, as well as it lists what happens when you're below the money breaks and above the money breaks. So all of those numbers will be changed. The corresponding increases will be made to match the increases that I've described here in this section. On the next one, in Schedule A, there's a money break that relates to when a performer is and is not paid for a wardrobe or makeup test on a day other than a work day. We've increased that money break from $1,200 to $1,500. In Schedule A, there's also a money break that relates to the use of a double. If you're over this money break, the provisions of Schedule B on use of a double or doubling apply, and we've increased that money break from $1,300 to $1,600. The schedule breaks are the dollar amounts that move a performer between different schedules of the agreement. Those are, kind of all of the attachments to the agreement that set out the specific terms that relate to your engagement. For theatrical performers on theatrical motion pictures, we've increased the schedule break for between schedules B and C, between schedules G1 and G2, and between schedules H2 and H3, from $6,350 to $6,500 for new contracts entered into on or after July 1, 2027. For television, we also increased the money breaks, but again, in television, you have that form of engagement for multiple picture stunt performers. So we've had to bifurcate here as well. So for schedules B and C, for schedules G1 and G2, and for schedules H2 and H3, except for the multiple picture stunt performer, we've increased the schedule break from $5,150 to $5,200 for new contracts entered into on or after July 1, 2027. Specifically for stunt performers on the multiple picture contract, we've changed the H2, H3 schedule break from currently $5,150 to $5,500 for new contracts entered into after July 1, 2027. and to $5,900 for new contracts entered into on or after July 1, 2028. In the last cycle in 2023, we were able to achieve terms for high budget AVOD programs. So those are streaming programs made for advertising supported video on demand. However, some of the terms that we achieved for high budget AVOD programs were the terms of the 2020 agreement. So they lagged to the prior agreement. This includes the schedule breaks, like we just talked about, the 14B span thresholds, the 18D and 19D residuals terms, options, and exclusivity. In this tentative agreement, we were able to achieve an update to the 2023 agreement. So these terms for high budget AVOD programs would still lag back one contract, but it would only be one, not two. So instead of the 2026 terms applying, the 2023 terms would apply in those cases. Also, in the new media section of the agreement, there's terms for what we call other than high budget new media. So these are projects that either don't have the budgets to be considered high budget, or they're less than 20 minutes in runtime. A lot of the terms that relate to these other than high budget new media projects are freely negotiable, but there are a few provisions of the contract that apply. We were able to add to that list this time and add that the employment of minors provisions for both principal performers and background actors will apply to the other than high budget new media provisions. For new media inspections, the language previously provided for agreements entered into in the preceding 6 months to be inspected. Under the new language, it would be all agreements entered into during the prior inspection period to be inspected. So a more consistent lineup there of what agreements can be inspected as part of the new media inspections. On vertical programs, you heard some mention of this earlier. Vertical microdramas are a growing area, of production. Currently, if an AMPTP company were to produce these would most likely, based on their current budget and run times, would be covered by that other than high budget section of the agreement that I talked about previously. So this would allow most of the terms, including rates, to be negotiable by the individual performer. However, in this tentative agreement, we've gotten the AMPTP to agree that if any AMPTP company begins producing these vertical microdramas on more than an experimental basis, the union can request to meet with them to negotiate terms and conditions that would apply to these verticals. If we're not able to reach an agreement on that, then the union would be able to publicly release our recommendations for individuals as to the types of things they want to consider when individually negotiating. The reason that language is important is because the new media side letter has some language that says that the union can't interfere in individual negotiations when it's free bargaining of terms. So this allows us to put some information out there to performers so that they have ideas of what to consider when they are negotiating their rates for vertical programs, should the AMPTP companies start producing these. We were able to establish a joint recommendation to the trustees of the health plan to establish a paid parental leave fund, similar to what the Writers Guild and the Directors Guild have. This would be funded through a 0.25% contribution effective July 1, 2028, which means benefits would be available no sooner than July 1, 2029. The health plan trustees would determine the eligibility for these benefits and all of the details, but this is a great achievement for those that are seeking parental leave. On the topic of per diem for principal performers, we're able to increase the per diem rate from $75 to $80 effective July 1, 2028. This breaks down to $17 for breakfast, $24 for lunch, and $39 for dinner. And we were also able to achieve the addition of language to schedules X1 and X2, the background actor schedules, to have similar provisions to the principal performers, including the rates. Historically, background actors, when traveled, have received per diem at the same amount as principal performers, but this locks that in so that there's no question what background actors are entitled to as far as per diem if they travel. On the topic of recurring performers and performers engaged by the week, we heard from a lot of performers this issue of what was called the shadow series regular. So increasingly, performers who probably should have been series regulars, they were in a lot of episodes, they were just being engaged on recurring contracts, whether it was recurring guest stars or recurring co-stars. So what we've come up with here is an escalator to help address some of that problem and provide the performers that are in this shadow series regular situation the possibility of some additional income on this. So for new seasons of series or new multi-part closed-end pictures, miniseries, commencing principal photography on or after July 1, 2027, if a weekly performer is in more than 60% of the episodes, the scale rate that applies to them increases to 120% of the minimum for the episodes beyond 60%. So if there's 10 episodes in a season and you're in 7 episodes, being in that 6th episode will then trigger this additional payment for the 7th episode. If you're a major role performer, the way the math works, this would work out to 130% of the day player rate times the number of days that's applicable for that type of major role performer. This does not apply to performers hired as modified deal performers, modified guest performers, series regular, or Schedule F performers. It also does not apply to performers that are exclusively engaged on daily or 3-day contracts. However, if you're engaged on a mix of daily, 3-day, and weekly contracts, then this would apply to you. Further, we got a commitment from the AMPTP to issue a bulletin reminding producers about the intention of the provisions that we negotiated last time about soft work windows and soft pickup dates. The purpose of some of these provisions was to allow performers to seek other work opportunities while they were waiting on dates from the producer that had first engaged them. So this bulletin will remind producers that that was the point. This is what was anticipated. And also that they should cooperate to the fullest extent that they're able to do so in allowing performers to seek other engagement on the days that they're not working for the producer that first employed them. It'll also remind everyone that communication is key. Communication of dates and availability between producers and performers is critical to allowing performers the flexibility to be able to get jobs in between when they're working on the production that first hired them. On the topic of consecutive employment and drop pickup, there are already some requirements related to when the producer has to give you notice of the soft pickup dates, but the producers have gone a step further here and agreed that they'll endeavor to provide as much notice as practical of the soft pickup dates and provide scheduling information upon request if available. On compensation reporting, we have agreement from the producers that they will report quarterly in electronic reporting. We were having an experience previously where reporting was kind of coming in sporadically through different forms and different ways, and we were having to aggregate the information. So this will provide the information to the union and all in one place. And we have increased the dollar amount to which they're reporting up to $1.5 million per performer per year. And now I will hand it back to Ray to pick up with residuals.
Thank you very much. We will start with streaming residuals. This first residual that we're talking about is the residual that applies if a program made for television or a theatrical motion picture moves over to a streaming platform. That residual has been and remains at 3.6% of distributors' gross receipts. And the way this residual works, the pension and health contributions come out of the pool. So whatever amount of money that 3.6 is, 20.5% of that comes out. And in theory, it goes to the plans. However, some of the performers will already be capped out on that particular episode. So the question becomes, what happens to the money that would have gone to the plans as contributions on that performer's earnings, but that is not being made as a contribution because that performer has already hit the cap? And the answer to this point has been that the producer has just been keeping it. So the full 3.6% residual has not been getting paid out. We addressed that in this cycle by changing the methodology by which that money is allocated. We no longer take the caps into account for purposes of determining how the money gets divided up, although the caps will continue to be relevant to the individual performer in terms of the credit that they get for those earnings. The 13.5% contribution rate that now applies to this residual, that 13.5% is going to go to the plans, and then the balance is going to be paid out pro rata to performers. And that new money that is going into this pool and being distributed is enough to make for a 5% increase to the amount of residuals getting paid to performers here, and still generate even more money for the plans that has been generated in the past. So it's actually quite a valuable improvement from a dollar figure perspective. It's going to apply retroactively, which is an unusual achievement in the area of residuals. Typically, residual formulas are locked in at the time of principal photography, but in this case, we're going to apply this new approach for pictures that commence principal photography on or after July 1st of 2020, when they are subject to new licenses. So we'll have an amount of reach back going back to 2020, and then if there are pictures that commence principal photography on or after the effective date of this agreement, being July 1st, 2026, then this new approach will apply even if it's an existing license. So that's how this is going to apply, and it's going to make for a significant increase to these residuals. We also increased the high budget SVOD formula that applies when you're talking about a program that is made for high budget SVOD in the first place, not a move over now. It's made for high budget SVOD, and it continues to be available on the streaming service. The way that residual works, it begins with your actual earnings for the episode, but your actual earnings are subjected to a ceiling. And that ceiling is going to go up by 2.5% in the second year of the deal, and by another 2.5% in the last year of the deal. So more of your earnings will factor into that formula, and that makes the residual higher. As well, there is a residual that applies when your content is made available on a related or affiliated foreign streaming services, so Netflix UK or something like that. And the amount that you get paid for that depends on the size of the subscribership, the size of that foreign platform. The highest subscriber factor that will result in the highest payment is factor 4. And right now, that's at 90%, and we're going to increase that to 95% in this tentative agreement effective in the first year. And that is also going to have the effect of driving up that residual. Next slide, please.
Ray, can I, before you get into the next one, so that's a lot, what you just described. I was just wondering if you or Duncan, like, I know we're not in hype mode, but I'm just wondering, like, if in lay terms you can explain in the long, tumultuous history of residuals, like, what does this residual package mean to us?
Well, I think that first element, Sean, means a lot. It means that we are going to be collecting every dollar of that 3.6% residual, which has not historically been the case. And if you think about how compensation is allocated amongst a typical cast, where the stars of the show will have a disproportionate amount of money, and those folks are likely to be capped out, it's that over the cap money that we're putting back into the pool, which is a lot of money, which is why this is worth a significant dollar figure, this change. And just from a perspective of righteousness, if we have a 3.6% residual, we should be providing every dollar of that 3.6% either to members or to the plans. And now that's what's going to happen. On the high budget SVOD residual, this is a residual formula that first went into the agreement, I believe, in 2014, and has been improved in every cycle since then, which makes this now one of the richest residual formulas in our agreement. Didn't start out that way, but cycle after cycle, as Duncan describes, that's our superpower, is we keep coming back to things cycle after cycle. And here's yet another improvement that we have made to this residual, which is a very significant residual to our members. And like I say, it's massively improved over where it started.
Thanks, Ray. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Next slide, please. Notice of theatrical exhibition. This is a notice obligation for exhibition at festivals and charitable events that will be notified to the union. We made a number of achievements in the area of advance payment of residuals. We don't like advance payment of residuals, just for anyone who's unfamiliar with the concept, because it is used to lower a performer's initial compensation. You think you're getting your quote, but really it turns out that a portion of the money is a prepayment of your residual. So then when residuals become due and you don't see your residual, that's when people get very unhappy and realize that they agreed to that prepayment. So we have always sought to cabin the ability to advance pay residuals. and we have additional success to report in that area. First of all, with respect to the success bonus payments that we bargained for in 2023, we have an agreement that those will not be prepaid at all. The contract already provides a minimum amount of money that you have to be paid before you can be advance paid any amount of residuals. And we're going to increase that amount by 3% in each year of the deal, the same as the general wage increase. We achieved in 2023 an additional new protection against the advance payment of residuals, and that is that if you were making $75,000 or less per episode or per week, that the producer would be limited to advance paying up to 15% of that money. They couldn't advance pay more than 15%. So we did two things. We increased that figure to 80,000, so now more people will be eligible for that protection. And we provided that even for the people who are over that number, let's say you're at 85,000, instead of that protection not applying to you at all, which is how the current contract works, now that limitation will apply to the first $80,000 that you made. So instead of taking you completely out of this protection, you will receive the protection for up to $80,000 of compensation. They'll be limited to 15% of that for the advance payment of your residual for that first 80,000. So that's actually a significant improvement in the way that formula works. With respect to the success bonus distribution fund, we have increased what is due to the fund. So as a reminder, if you are on a high budget SVOD program that meets the success metric of 20% of domestic subscribers viewing it, then the residuals eligible cast of that show gets what amounts to 75% of an annual residual as a bonus, and then 25% of an annual residual goes into a fund that is distributed more broadly. So included amongst the people who can collect from that fund are certain background actors and off-camera stunt performers, people who don't normally get residuals at all. We have improved the amount of money due to that fund. So now instead of the performer in the qualifying show getting 75% and the fund getting 25%, that performer will still get 75%, but the fund will get 35%. So the producer's obligation will be 110% of the total residual. Next slide, please. We are getting improved reporting in connection with that success bonus distribution fund to separate out what's attributable to residuals and what's attributable to contributions to the plans. And that resolves a sticky wicket that we had found ourselves in with respect to disambiguating those two amounts. Next slide, please. We're going to recommend to the industry-wide safety committee that they investigate whether to issue a bulletin regarding the use of prosthetics, particularly where they're affixed to your face. We want them to research that and, if appropriate, issue a bulletin about it. Next slide, please. For series regulars, we have first improvements in the area of pilots and initial options. We have increased the minimum amount of money that you have to be paid in order to be able to grant a pilot or initial option from 3 times weekly scale to 5 times weekly scale. We have increased the 24A money break from 10,000 to 15,000. The 24A money break determines whether or not you are eligible for the protections of Section 24A. So right now, if you're making $10,000 or more, you're not eligible for those protections. Those protections limit the duration of the option that you can agree to. Now more people will be eligible for that protection because we have increased that money break to $15,000. In addition to that, for folks who are over the money break and therefore aren't protected by Section 24A, they have to commence being paid within 90 days following the expiration of their option period. It's not new money in this case, it's early money. So it was a partial achievement of what we wanted to get here. But the fact is, there is now at least a deadline by which your work has to start or you have to start getting paid. Under the current contract, if you are over that $10,000, now $15,000 money break, there is no limitation, and you can be asked to wait for a near unlimited amount of time for the work to actually start on your show. In the area of options for additional seasons, so it's after the pilot and initial option and the first season of the show, options for a subsequent season. This is where we made substantial inroads during a midterm negotiation with the AMPTP. We've made further improvements. This money break, again, determines whether or not you are eligible for the limitations on the option that can be agreed to in the contract. You are not eligible for it right now if you make $65,000 or more per week or per episode for a half-hour show. That number is going to go up to $70,000. The number right now for an hour show is $70,000. That's going to go up to $75,000. But the money break for minors engaged on children's programming will remain unchanged at $32,000. The exclusivity limitations, obviously that works together with options. It's a similar concept. There's a minimum amount that you have to be paid before you can grant any exclusivity at all. That's going to go up from twice weekly scale to 4 times weekly scale. And then there are limitations in the contract that are applicable to you unless you make over the money break. So that money break is going to go up by the same amounts as the option money breaks. So 65 to 70 for a half hour and 70 to 75 for an hour. And it will stay the same for the minors engaged on children's programming. Next slide, please. For commercial exclusivity, this is how much you have to be paid before you can agree that you will not do commercials competitive with a show sponsor. So that's going to increase for half-hour programs from $12,500 to $20,000. For on or off camera, for on camera only, it will go from $20,000 to $25,000 with the same $12,500 to $15,000 for on or off camera. For 1 hour programs, the number is going to go from $17,500 to $30,000, and then from $20,000 to $30,000 for both on and off camera exclusivity. The span money break is also going up. That is the amount of money at which that you have to be paid before you can bargain without any limitations on overall production time. So this is the overall production time money break. That's going to go up from $25,000 to $35,000 an episode. All of this is starting in the second year, and I should have said that for the commercial exclusivity numbers too. It's starting in the second year. It'll go from 25 to 30. If you're talking about a series presented in a combined series format, it will go from 125 to 175. And for a 13 episode guarantee, that number will go from 190 to 250,000. Next slide, please. We made improvements in the area of relocation allowances. Again, this is the money that you are entitled to if you are a series regular. You're being required to relocate away from your residence for the show that you're working on. That is a $5,000 a month obligation under the agreement, but there will be several improvements to how it works. First, there's no proration for partial months anymore. So right now we have producers that if they bring you in for 5.5 months, they will make a 5.5 month payment. But we all know that's not how rent works. You're going to have to pay that full last month's rent. So we have removed the ability to prorate partial months. We've also increased the number of months for which a series regular is entitled to receive that $5,000 a month payment. So if you're on a series with an order of 18 episodes or more, right now that you are entitled to 6 months, that will go to 7 months. And for all other series, right now you are entitled to 6 months, but that will go to uncapped. So however long you're there is how long you're entitled to the relocation allowance. We made a particular rule for circumstances where you are relocating outside of the United States, so that if you provide a lease in that foreign location prior to traveling, the producer will advance you the first 2 months of your relocation allowance prior to travel. And they'll do that in US dollars. That will help people deal with things like first and last month's rent and security deposit. For that final clarification bullet, the language of each month during which the performer is required by producer to remain away from their residence overnight, that means how long they told you you were going to be gone. And if they finish early, they still have to pay you through the length of time that they told you you were going to be gone. So if they told you you were going to be gone for 6 months, and therefore you signed a 6-month lease, and it turns out they finished early, they finished at 5 months. If you're actually incurring that 6 month of expenses, you're paying those expenses because you signed a 6-month lease because they told you you were going to be gone for 6 months. Well, they still owe you the extra month, even if they wrapped you early. Next slide, please. We have some items for singers. All of these are proposals that were brought by the singers and requested by singers with the goal of generating more singer work under the agreement. There is already a 3-hour theatrical off-camera singer rate that's at 50% of session. We have been granting this by waiver for many, many years, and we have now incorporated it into the contract. Similarly, there is a demo waiver that we've incorporated that allows for a 2-hour session at 25% of the applicable session rate, with 100% due of that amount due should the demo be used in the final production. For soundtrack conversions, we've amended that provision to require payment of 50% of the applicable singer rate for all the tracks released, and also you still have to make the applicable payments to the Sound Recordings Distribution Fund for royalties. For hourly breaks, we've increased the hourly breaks for singers from 5 to 10 minutes per hour, and we've established mandatory reporting for all off-camera singer sessions, which is data that producers themselves often ask us for, so we will have a provision now to make sure we collect all of it. Next slide, please. For stunt performers, we have long sought, and we sought again in this cycle, residuals for off-camera stunt performers, sometimes referred to as stunt riggers. We made progress in this area, but we're unable to get it over the line because of concerns that the producers had about distinguishing between which off-camera stunt performers would be eligible for the residual and which would not. We agreed with them that we would set up a committee during the term of this agreement so that we could discuss administrative mechanisms to address those concerns. For stunt coordinators who are under a flat deal for multiple episodes, there's a new rate for that that's going to always be equal to the theatrical flat deal rate. That's the higher rate. So the coordinators will always get the higher rate for that. We clarified what that rate covers. So if you're engaged as a coordinator on multiple episodes and you are asked to do prep work on another episode, if that prep work is something that's scheduled at your discretion and that does not require you to report to a designated location, including to an online meeting, then that can be covered as part of the multiple episode rate. But if there are prep services that are required, that require you to actually show up to set or to be at a meeting that the producer schedules, then that will require payment of an additional day contract to that stunt coordinator. We also improved for coordinators who are under this new flat deal multiple picture contract that rather than the current 1 day of work, right now stunt coordinators are entitled to residuals based on 1 day of work for fixed residuals. That will now go to 2 days of work if you're engaged under the multiple episode contract. And if you do any on-camera stunt performance as part of the engagement, if you're the coordinator and you put yourself on camera, that will trigger an additional day so that you can get to a fixed residual of up to 3 days of work, or more if you have more additional days. Here we're now onto artificial intelligence, where we made a number of very significant improvements to the contract. The first set of improvements that we'll talk about relate to your digital replica, and that is a digital version of you. It resembles you. It's a digital copy of you. I want to distinguish that from what we used to call a synthetic performer, and we've changed the language to just be a synthetic, and that is a digital asset that looks like a person, but not like a specific person. So it doesn't look like any specific individual, but it looks like it's a human being. So we'll talk first about the digital replica protections that we added in this cycle. First, we have an explicit protection for no-scan digital replicas, The technology here has evolved so that a digital replica can be created of you without scanning you. The producer can use the same photography they're taking for the picture itself and use it to create the replica. So we have nailed down in advance that if they do that, it's still an employment-based digital replica, and all of the requirements and provisions of the contract will still apply. The second clarification we achieved has to do with the ability to make digital alterations to a performance using a digital replica. And this provision allows the producer to make digital alterations without getting additional consent, but only if those alterations do not amend the work beyond how it was originally scripted, recorded, and/or performed. We had a concern about the scripted prong of that test and have therefore clarified that this refers to a script that was provided to you on or before the date you performed in the scene, so that there could be no manipulation of this criteria by using a subsequent or unprovided script. For independently created digital replicas, these are the digital replicas where it's not created by the producer. It might be a digital replica that you yourself created of yourself, and now you're allowing the producer to use it. Right now, what we have for that is consent is required. There has to be bargaining, and pension and health contributions have to be made on any money that is paid to that performer. We have added now that the day performer rate will be the minimum for that negotiation. So you have to get paid at least that much. And if that ICDR is used to create a performance that would qualify a natural performer for residuals, then the performer whose ICDR that is has to receive those residuals. We reversed a rule that we agreed to in the 2023 cycle of bargaining that allowed producers to use a digital replica to dub you into another language without consent. That proved unpopular, particularly among the foreign voice performer community, who they're the ones being displaced when this happens. So we were able to bargain that with respect to consent requirements, those will continue to apply. So the producer will need to get consent to dub a performance into another language with your digital replica, and this will commence in the second year of the deal. We achieved protections for your biometric data, so your fingerprints, palm prints, or iris scans may not be used for any purpose unrelated to the picture. We achieved protections for minor performer digital replicas, that those digital replicas cannot be used to depict a minor as nude or as engaged in simulated sexual activity. And finally, but significantly, we achieved strike protection, so your digital replica cannot be used to scab for you during a strike. Next slide. More digital replica protections, actually. We have digital replica security provisions now. So access to your digital replica has to be limited to people with a legitimate business need for it. And the producer must make commercially reasonable efforts to protect that replica from unauthorized access, use, or copying. We have digital replica transfer protection, which means that the original producer will remain responsible for complying with the contract with respect to your digital replica, even if they transfer ownership to another party, unless that other party agrees to stand in the shoes of the original producer and obey all of the contract requirements, including allowing us to arbitrate against them if they violate the contract. And the union has to approve the financial responsibility of the proposed transferee, so they cannot transfer the rights to your digital replica to a fly-by-night company that is judgment-proof and avoid liability themselves. We have to approve the financial responsibility of whoever they're transferring it to, and the transferee has to agree they're going to obey the contract. We can arbitrate against them, and if all of that doesn't happen, then the producer remains on the hook for whatever gets done with your digital replica. We negotiated for a requirement that the producer needs an articulable business reason if they are going to scan you. This relates to a concern that folks have had that producers are doing this haphazardly or automatically or without any real reason to do it. And so while they will not be required to automatically disclose this reason as part of the engagement process, they do have to have a reason. And if it appears that they are abusing this provision, the union can contact them and demand that they provide that reason. We have very significant enhanced protections against synthetics in this contract. Right now, if the producer wants to use a synthetic, or what we used to call a synthetic performer, they have to contact the union and they have to negotiate with us they have to notify us, and they have to negotiate with us over any appropriate considerations. We have added to that. First, we have added a strict notice and bargaining schedule for that to happen, but we have added additional commitments on the part of the producer. So they have agreed to a principle strongly favoring human performance. They have agreed that human performers will continue to perform work covered by the Codified Basic and Television Agreement, and they have agreed that they will not use a synthetic in a human role unless it brings significant additional value to the production. And when they are assessing whether it brings significant additional value, they have to treat digital replicas as human performance, meaning they have to show that there's something that they can do with a synthetic that they cannot do with a digital replica. And we think that's actually a very difficult requirement to meet. There's very little that can be done with a synthetic that cannot also be done with a digital replica. So we think this puts some very meaningful constraints around the ability to use synthetics under this contract. And if these terms are violated, we can arbitrate, and we can arbitrate for an amount of money that is not necessarily limited to what a performer would have been paid to do the work instead. So this creates the uncertainty of a potential large damage award that looms over a producer that wants to do this. We think it's going to prove to be a very effective deterrent. Would point out that we have had no producers come forward during the term of the contract to tell us they're using synthetic performers, and these additional limitations incline us to believe that we are not about to see a huge uptick here, because these conditions are very difficult to meet. Finally, we have a notice and discussion obligation with regard to licensing performances for AI training. So if they do that and it's a paid license with a third party, they have to sit down and talk to us about that license, including the possibility that our performers who are in that picture should share in the money. Is there another AI slide, Jessica?
Nope, now we're on to Tri-Guild audit.
All right, well, then I'll turn it back to you, and Jessica will bring us home.
Thank you. So moving on to the Tri-Guild audit program, the AMPTP has agreed to increase their funding of this program, so long as SAG-AFTRA, the Directors Guild, and the Writers Guild increase their proportional share of the funding as well. Oh, there we go. On the topic of wardrobe, for principal performers, we've achieved an increase in the cleaning allowance if you provide your own wardrobe, effective July 1, 2027. For formal wear, it increases from $27 to $30, and for all other clothes, it increases from $12 to $14. Additionally, just like we achieved for background actors, for principal performers, we achieved an adjustment of $21.50 per day that a performer is required to wear a corset during principal photography and/or rehearsal. For Wi-Fi access, if a producer is reasonably aware that a location has limited cellular telephone tech coverage, they will provide notice to the performers and background actors and provide a phone number that can be used on set to reach the performers in case of emergency. Additionally, if the producers were to make Wi-Fi available to any employees represented by other unions for personal use, then the same would be provided to principal performers and background actors under this agreement. On the topic of young performers, we have a number of gains. So first is a clarification regarding education time. It clarifies that all time spent in education, including if you're just having the minor come in for banking purposes, is treated as paid work time, but doesn't start consecutive employment. The agreement has historically had a requirement to have a minor chaperone for minors up to 14 years old. We've increased that to minors up to 16 years old, but provided for an exception for a call of an hour or less. We also clarified that the chaperone might be a teacher or welfare worker, child labor coordinator, or some other appropriately qualified individual. This was to address concerns that sometimes the person assigned the minor chaperone duties might be a very inexperienced person, that had no training, no expertise in working with minors. So we have put some qualifications on who the minor chaperone might be. In the agreement, it currently provides that only the teacher and the minors that they're teaching are permitted in the schoolroom. But this tentative agreement has provided a way for the parent or guardian to view the children when they're in the schoolroom whenever possible. That might be through an open window, a glass door in a window, or a glass window in a door, or by monitoring, but a way for the parent to observe the children in the schoolroom. Additionally, the parties will recommend to the industry-wide Labor Management Safety Committee to review Safety Bulletin number 10 to see whether they need to add any guidelines specific to minors in that bulletin. That's the bulletin that speaks to the use of artificially created atmospheric fog and haze. And finally, as Ray mentioned in the digital replica section, the producers are prohibited from using a minor's digital replica in any manner that would depict the minor as nude or engaged in a simulated sexual activity, including by aging up or de-aging the minor. On the topic of arbitrators, we have a list of arbitrators that are able to arbitrate disputes under this agreement. Many times it is our experience that during the term of the agreement, the arbitrators either retire or sadly pass away. So we have removed the deceased and retired arbitrators from the list and replaced them with 4 new arbitrators in LA and 2 new arbitrators in New York. On the topic of arbitration caps, there's many pages of language in the agreement about the disputes that are arbitrable, and the dollar amounts at which they might be arbitrable or which they would no longer be able to be submitted to arbitration. We've streamlined a lot of that language to make it clear, more easy to understand, and increase the caps on many types of disputes, including making all disputes under the terms of the CBA arbitrable, and increasing the dollar amount for a dispute of a claimed under an individual performer's personal services agreement, or in the case of termination of a performer. And additionally, for service of arbitration demands, we have moved into the modern era and established a process for email service, as it's currently required to be served by first-class mail. On the topic of pronoun inclusion, the producers will use best efforts to provide the performers an option to indicate their preferred pronouns on their deal memos or other onboarding paperwork. And additionally, the producer will use best efforts to include those preferred pronouns on cast lists or call sheets, so that the rest of the cast and crew can know what everybody's preferred pronouns are. For side letter K, this was mentioned earlier in the pension section as well. Side letter K provides reduced pension and health contribution rates for pilots' presentations in the first 2 seasons of 1-hour series. Under the terms of this new agreement, side letter K would be expanded to include the first 2 seasons of half-hour series as well. The producers brought to the negotiation a concern that they were having difficulties with licensing high-budget SVOD programs in foreign free television due to the nature of the fixed residual that applies to that type of exhibition. So we've come up with an approach here for high-budget SVOD programs exhibiting in foreign free television for the first time ever on or after July 1, 2026. The current residual formula would be modified by a ratio that uses 75% of the foreign overages threshold as the denominator. So what does that mean? That means that it'll reduce the fixed residual until and unless the total distributor's foreign grosses reach 75% of the applicable foreign overages threshold. Once grosses reach 75% of the applicable overages threshold, 35% of total applicable minimum will have been paid to the performers. And if they reach 100% of that threshold, then 46.67% of total applicable minimum will have been paid. So the goal here is to enable the producers to license high-budget SVOD shows into foreign free television more, and bring in more residuals for performers on those shows. On the topic of safety training, we've updated a letter with a letter of understanding, and confirmed that stunt performer safety training will include the A safety course, and that will need to be completed by October 1st, 2026. Also, if a performer or background actor is required to report for the type of training that's safety, harassment prevention, workplace violence prevention, those kind of general employee training, if they do this on a day that they don't otherwise work, the producer could use a half-day rate that would cover up to 4 hours of training time. This is available for both principal performers and background actors. On the topic of the prepaid looping, there's currently a money break in Schedule A that allows day performers being paid $5,000 or more per day to have one prepaid looping day. This provision would add the ability for the producer to have a second prepaid looping day for performers that are guaranteed $10,000 or more per day. Additionally, as part of this, the producers confirmed that looping days for all performers are scheduled subject to the performer's professional availability. So essentially what that means is you don't have to keep yourself available because the producer might need you to come back in and do some looping or ADR. You're able to, go about your other employment, and they will have to work around your professional availability. Since 2014, the union has waived various ordinances around the country that allow for waivers of sick leave policies. Generally speaking, these sick leave laws aren't really designed for the type of employment that performers and background actors experience. So where these laws are waivable, the union has historically waived them. As part of this tentative agreement, we have updated that list. So we've added newly enacted ordinances that are waivable, but removed any ordinances that were repealed or where the conditions that allowed them to be waived no longer exist. The producers were interested in having the ability to add family companies to signatories to the agreement. So those are, commonly controlled entities that are kind of in their larger corporate families. As part of the tentative agreement, we've agreed that they could do that so long as the current signatory guarantees the obligations of the family company that they are trying to bring onto the agreement. There are various provisions within the agreement that sunset by their own terms, so they would expire if they weren't renewed. So we've renewed those clauses that would otherwise expire. The producers just sought to have us waive California SB 294, which is a law that provides some certain know your rights information to be provided to employees, as well as for employees to have the ability to add an emergency contact within their employer's records. The producers were concerned about some aspects of the law that required certain timing for when they had to provide this information to performers. And as we all know, performers work all kinds of schedules, and there's really no certainty as to when in a year you might work for a particular employer, if you'll even work for that employer in a particular year. So as part of this agreement, we did agree to waive the law so that the producers don't run into that timing issue. But in exchange, the producers would have to use best efforts to provide performers and background actors with this information as part of their start paperwork. So they'll attach the Know Your Rights bulletin there as well. Before we get into questions, if you just had so much fun in this seminar that you would love to come again, we have opportunities for you. I think Duncan mentioned them earlier. There will be another one tomorrow, Wednesday, May 13th, and then another on Thursday, May 28th. Additionally, we'll have one specifically for the New York local on Tuesday, May 26th, one for the Los Angeles local on Wednesday, May 27th, and ones for the mids and smalls on Thursday, May 28th. Don't worry, you don't have to memorize all this information. You can find it at sagaftra.org/contracts2026 if you'd like to sign up to attend another one of these sessions. We're going to head into questions momentarily, unless Ray, Duncan, or Sean have to add or would like to add any more comments. If you think of a question that you didn't ask, you didn't get a chance to ask, of course, you can always email tvtheatrical2026@sagaftra.org, and you can find lots of information at sagaftra.org/contracts2026.
Awesome, Jessica. Thanks to you and Ray. That was outstanding.
Yeah, that was a terrific job. So good work. And now we're on to the Q&A portion. So how exciting is that? All right, we've got some questions coming in. Why don't we start? First comment question is, overall, well done and good agreement. Have a couple of questions. Please explain how the 1 day major role minimum at scale plus 10 is an improvement. It's what most people get anyway to make residuals commissionable. So now it will likely limit what many people get with this exception by getting paid $2,500 to $3,500 for the day.
I guess I would say it's now scale plus 10 plus 10. The underlying rate to which you typically bargain a plus 10 for the agent has gone up itself by 10% in that circumstance.
Great. 10 plus 10. Love it. All right. Next question or comment. I'm a background actor in Los Angeles, and I haven't worked since October 2025. I see a lot of benefits for when I'm on set. How is this contract helping me to get on set to get these benefits? If I never get to the levels of earning necessary to get healthcare or retirement benefits, why should any background actor join the union? I have some thoughts on that, but Ray, you want to jump in first?
Sure. I mean, there are provisions here that are designed to get additional work for background actors. There is the provision that for feature-length content that is being made for a streaming platform like a Netflix, right now that has the same number of covered positions as a television program, so it's 25 covered positions. For those feature-length programs that are now going to be 85 minutes or longer and cost $30 million or more, that's going to go up to the 85 that applies to theatrical. So there's a whole bunch of additional covered jobs there as a result of that change. And as well in the area of television, the 25 covered positions will go to 26 and ultimately to 27 before the deal is done. So there are provisions in here that are designed to provide additional covered work for background actors.
I mean, I think also I would just add to that, number one, and this is from the 2023 contract, so it's already in here, but it's important to recognize that in the AI provisions relating to background actors, the companies are required to hire the full complement of covered background positions before they can make use of any, substitution by digital replication or synthetics. So I think that's a really powerful protection for covered union jobs that's worth mentioning. And also, I just think it's worth noting that the negotiating committee and throughout this entire process, we've been very focused on helping to make sure that while we were fighting for the best possible contract terms for our members, that we were doing so in a way that helped foster a resurgence of production in the United States, because we're extremely mindful of the fact that while some of our members may work on productions all over the world, many of our members tend to work on productions that are happening within the United States, and certainly background actors within the zones would be a perfect example of that. And so by calibrating how we handled our proposals, especially by getting this negotiation done in a timeline that avoids the industry starting its typical practice of slowing down production and stockpiling as they approach a expiration date of a contract, we have, I think, helped support what is a nascent but detectable growth in production in Los Angeles and around the country. And we want that to continue, but we also want that to continue within the framework of the right contract terms. And I think that's the balance that we've struck. Sean, I think I saw your hand go up. Did you want to say something also on this?
Well, you made the point I wanted to make, which is probably unsatisfying for someone who's like, hey, how do I get back on? You'd like to be able to provide something specific, but we went first early. We went in February to start negotiations, and that's because we have a huge number of constituents. You can see what package we just went through, and that's what we got. It was a much bigger package when we started, but we did that so the industry would not be existing in a state of concern. And we finished at the end of or at the beginning of May. You just noticed there's the media, there wasn't a lot of reporting about this process from our side. It was because we were disciplined, we were responsible, and we tried to, bargaining should be just like the normal course of doing business. It shouldn't be this like breathless terror exercise every time. And maybe if they continue the way they did this time to treat us with courtesy and respect, it won't be that way. But, we are seeing signs of improvement in the industry. And, I don't know if you could like directly attribute that to us, but we didn't do it. We didn't make it worse.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. All right, let's keep rolling. We want to make sure we get to all the questions. Next, did we miss section 39L specifically? Is a studio or producer free to use likeness data for free if it's with a sister company? And if they don't receive payment from a third party, can they give likeness data for free to a third party?
Right now, there is legal uncertainty around whether the studio's permission is even required for an AI company to use their data to train their model. So there is no license like this that has actually happened. And the studios are certainly of the view that it is very unlikely that it will happen, because right now the AI companies can obtain all of this data for free. So they're unlikely to go pay a studio for it. We put this provision in as a backstop so that in case something changes and there is such a circumstance, that we would at least be in a conversation with the studios about it. Right now, the language is limited to circumstances where it's a paid license and it's to a third party. But like I say, the likely application of this is non-existent.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's also worth noting that a lot of our compensation frameworks for licensing are premised on the idea that the producer is incentivized to make a deal that makes money for them. So whenever we have a DGR type formula, the concept is we're taking a percentage of what it is that the producer or distributor is able to gain by attempting to license that work out. And so similarly, if we were, following that same philosophy in this area, we would be looking to have them make their best deal and then have us take a share of that. But I think Ray's, core point is super important, which is, legal uncertainty is a kind way to put it. I think everyone is aware that AI companies routinely take copyrighted material that they can find publicly, and they ingest it and use it without any permission or any compensation. And it is as yet unclear whether the courts are going to side with rights holders on that. So it's very hard to get companies to agree to do something that might turn out to be fair use and allowed under copyright law, unfortunately. We're obviously fighting against that. We're supporting cases that are attempting to preserve those rights, and we're fighting for even stronger rights at the federal level and at state level, things like the No Fakes Act, et cetera. So, but that is the reality. Okay, next. For submission for employment, no charges for access to casting notices. Does this affect casting networks and companies like Booked Talent, Extras Management? How will this be implemented? Will there be fines? And what will the alternative to get these casting notices for free be?
I think that as yes is the answer to any question that any third-party casting service that is doing work for an AMPTP company is covered by this provision. So I think I'm not familiar with every one of the casting services you identified, but I think the answer is likely to be yes. It does apply to them. If they are charging fees for people to be able to access casting notices, they're going to have to stop. I think the first thing that we're going to do is enlist the support of the AMPTP to get them to stop. We certainly have made efforts in that regard, and with some success. But having the representative of all of their major clients in that conversation with us, telling them they have to stop doing that, is going to be very significant. We know that they had conversations with some of these casting services during negotiations while we were bargaining this point. So I think the process of deterring and preventing services from charging in this circumstance is already underway. If we have to get into a more punitive framework, we will file grievances as necessary, and we will come up with a remedy. The remedy may be that they have to give you a free way to submit around that process. But what we're trying to do is change the model, get them to change the model so they're not charging in the first place.
Excellent. All right, next question. This individual says, I joined late, sadly. Any brief intel on the topic of merging the two unions' pension funds? We talked quite a bit about that, so I think probably we'll just catch you up on the replay and use this as an opportunity to remind folks that there will be another webinar tomorrow, but also we will distribute a recorded version of this for people to watch at their convenience as well. And that's also a good opportunity for me to mention, although it hasn't been asked yet, that for those of you who are interested in reading the full text of the memorandum of agreement for this contract, that's not something that has always been done in the past. In fact, the only time we've done that in the past was last time in 2023. Having said that, we know a lot of people really like to see that full written out language. And so if you're one of them, we expect to post the MOA by the 25th of May. So give you more than a week to review it before the voting deadline. So if that's important to you, you can wait for the MOA to be released. We'll announce it when it is, and then you can review it and read it. If that's not important to you, that's fine as well. It's really up to you as a voter to decide whether you want to wait for that or not.
Well,
next question. Oh, sorry. Go. Go ahead, Sean.
I'm going to add a thought. It's sort of a process thing you just described, but it's really important to us, that as many members as possible participate in this process. So as soon as you make the announcement that the board has approved this to go out, there's a lot of publicity about it. There's this webinars now. There's one tomorrow, whatever. There's a bunch of stuff, and we don't want to miss people who are wanting to participate at that moment. And you simply can't have the MOA language drafted as quickly as this. So we're trying to, like I said before, balance equities, and that's one of the ways we're doing it. And Duncan, did you say the thing this time? You usually say that you actually can't finish it without working across the.
Oh, I didn't specifically say that, but yeah, I mean, the MOA is the product of both sides agreeing to the drafted language. So it's not like we just write the MOA and publish it. We have to, finish our edits on it. Then we have to make sure that the AMPTP is in agreement with it. Whatever disagreement there is over any of the drafting has to be resolved. So that's why it's not something that's just instantly available on the day of. And, this is a very complicated and lengthy agreement. Making sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed takes a little bit of time. Great. So on to our next question. In regard to synthetics and AI, the phrase, quote, significant additional value, quote, is very vague and unclear and does not seem legally enforceable. It seems that Ray is saying the value is in the synthetics capabilities, but could the value also simply reside in providing significant cost savings to the producer, ease of scheduling, foreign market customization, etc.? The legality is confusing. Thanks.
So again, I think the key to understanding the value of this is the comparison between what you could do with a synthetic and a digital replica. So yes, there are significant cost savings that could be achieved with a synthetic. You might avoid needing to have a location or make a set. But you can also do that with a digital replica. A digital replica is also a digital asset that can be manipulated in all of the ways that a synthetic performer can be manipulated. So whatever economic advantage you thought you were going to get from a synthetic, you should also be able to get from a digital replica. And so, that's really the value of that comparison, and why we think even acknowledging the types of cost savings, et cetera, that could be achieved with a synthetic, that this is still a meaningful standard. We ourselves have only been able to come up with a few examples of where we think a synthetic might generate some value you couldn't get with a digital replica. So again, our view is this is actually a pretty narrow exception to have to try to fit into.
And Ray, one of the reasons it's good having a digital replica serve that function is because it's tied to an individual human being who can be negotiated with, compensated, and enjoy protections.
Yeah, and they have to be paid under our contract. So we know that that's going to be a circumstance where somebody's getting paid, and the way our compensation formulas work for digital replicas, you're getting paid based on an estimate of what you would have gotten paid to do the work yourself. So the whole idea is you're being kept whole as though you were being hired to do the work.
And Duncan, can you just share, like, from the perspective of an arbitrator, how they would look at this and what standard they'd have to apply? Because I think it's like, okay, so it's really all up to them.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny because I as a lawyer, which Ray also is, I don't consider significant additional value to be a particularly vague term. I consider that to be a term that is quite ascertainable by use of just the standard definitions of those words. And so from my perspective, that means that it's not just that the companies have to be able to establish that there is some additional value to be gained by the use of a synthetic, but that additional value has to be significant or substantial. And it's clear in the context of the language that that is in comparison to a human performer or their digital replica. So as Ray articulated, that is a high hurdle to get over. And if they don't get over that, then we're in the arbitration scenario. Let's say they violate the provision. There's an arbitration. The arbitrator is going to hear evidence from us about the contract negotiations. There are on the record statements made during the bargaining that would be relevant to that, to the fact that the remedy is damages and that those damages could be many multiples of the cost of having used a human performer in the role. So it really opens up a great deal of opportunity for us to really pursue significant damages if this provision is breached. And I think that's also really important because remember, these companies are concerned about the uncertainty that that presents. So if they're going to use a synthetic, they're going to have to establish that they've met this criteria. They're going to have to enter into a bargaining period with the union during which they can't use the synthetic until that bargaining period is complete. And that bargaining period, which amounts to almost a calendar month, after that time period, if they do decide to go forward with it and the union disagrees with them about the significant additional value, now they're in an arbitration, and there are potentially significant damages that could be awarded in that arbitration. These are all deterrent factors. So while I get that people would love to just have a bright line rule that says, no, no synthetics, that would be great. We'd all love to have that. That wasn't something that was achievable, but this gets us almost to that point, just in a way that requires a little more careful reading of the provisions. But I think that it's worth it because this meaningfully deters companies from shifting their resources towards synthetics. And I think what it will do is continue what's happened over the last 2.5 years, which is that the companies have not been deploying synthetics. They have focused on digital replication, and even that, the use has been relatively low. So I think that is a good place to be as we enter into this, coming period.
And in terms of the language that we achieved relative to agreements like it, I know that you travel around the world giving speeches on this stuff, and you've spoken to us about where you think this fits in the overall game plan of civilization trying to protect itself from the onslaught of this technology.
Yeah, I mean, I'm incredibly proud of this language. I think that I would stack this language up against any statute or any collective bargaining agreement or other contract that I've seen anywhere in the world. This provision, I think, is groundbreaking, and I think a lot of others will seek to follow in this pathway. It is going to be hard to achieve this type of agreement for people who don't have the same bargaining leverage in the same context. But this is definitely, I think, going to be a model that people will be interested to follow. So, okay, let's move on to our next question. Why an extension of negotiations when AI is advancing monthly? Why would AMPTP want this? Not us, them. It was them who proposed this, not us. So this was something we conceded to. What are we giving them?
Well, I mean, the AMPTP wants this because they want stability in the industry, and they do not want the threat of labor disruption to, deter the continued improvement that we're starting to see in production levels. That's not necessarily why we're giving it to them. I mean, those arguments may be valid, but the union's perspective was if you want a 4-year deal, you have to make it worth our while. You have to make it worth our while to agree to that. That's something you're coming to the table asking for. And we think that what we have achieved in this negotiation and the great number of improvements that took, an hour and a half to summarize in bullet form, made it worthwhile to agree to that 4-year deal. Specifically with respect to artificial intelligence, all of the improvements that you're hearing about digital replication, and in particular what we just discussed about synthetics, also puts us in a position where we feel comfortable we have established a sufficient protection there that we're not going to see work, lost to synthetics in the next 4 years of the deal. Again, a reminder, we had a notice and bargaining obligation for the past 3 years. 0 studios have come forward to say they want to use a synthetic. It's now even harder for them to come forward and want to use a synthetic. So we think we have protections that are going to put us in good shape for the next 4 years. And we think that we got tremendous value out of this negotiation for being willing to extend the term by a year.
Can I add that it's not just that they wanted a 4-year term, it's how badly they wanted the 4-year term. I mean, this was their, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 interest in doing it. And they were able to go beat by beat, proposal by proposal for whatever, for month and a half, 6 weeks, and then another week, so I think not just about the AI piece, which we absolutely would not have agreed to a longer term when technology is changing so fast, and you don't know, they swear they're not into some particular kind of business this week, and the next week they invest $1 billion in a company that's just that's doing the stuff that we don't want. So that piece of it was absolutely like a no-go unless we were satisfied with the language. But the rest of it, I mean, the residual stuff, for example, massive adjustments in residuals. So I know that we like to look at the 4-year term, or we look at the minimums, and we look at what the other unions are doing. We are standing on our own 2 feet. We have tons of leverage. They were absolutely, well, without being disrespectful, they were concerned, visibly concerned, every moment of the negotiation that this might go sideways. So I think we used our leverage as much as it could possibly be used, consistent with not wanting to destabilize things unnecessarily.
Okay, great. Next, can you explain why TV caps were only raised by one position? I'm seeing their meeting back.
They were raised by 2 positions, just to be clear. That is relative to what we have achieved in other terms of the agreement. That is not a bad gain in TV caps, and it also comes with a gain in theatrical caps for SVOD pictures. And it comes as part of a deal where there were 10 or a dozen or more proposals achieved on behalf of Background. Background came to the table with a large number of proposals that we fought for and were righteous, and we achieved a tremendous amount for Background. I think it would be a mistake to focus on that one provision as indicative of what Background have gained out of this contract. All of the Schedule X parity, new adjustments, intimacy coordinator rights, et cetera, on down the line were achieved for Background. And I think if you look at past deals, you will not find very many that achieve the number of TV positions by more than 2.
Thanks, Ray. Next question is, for the days qualifier being frozen for Background, please explain if that means it's to end a way to qualify by days, or is it to remain where it currently is? So many people are asking this and it needs to be clarified. I'll take this one, Ray, just to say it is not a way to end qualifying by days, not at all. To the contrary, what it means is that despite the fact that there are eligibility increases in the amount of dollars that must be achieved in order to qualify, that there will not be any increase in the number of days that are needed to qualify under the alternative days threshold. And in fact, we are concerned that the alternative days threshold has gotten too high. And so it has been agreed that the trustees are going to take a look at that threshold and determine if that threshold needs to be adjusted downward. But during the term of this agreement, there will not be any increase in the number of days, but you will still be able to qualify using the alternative day qualification process. Next question. So to negotiate on synthetic use, they have to come to you. It's self-attestation, correct? No producer has come forward because why would they? Do you have any tech or audit system that could prove they began use of a synthetic without negotiation or consent?
I don't know that there's a technological solution to that, but I will say that not only our staff and our elected leadership, but members at large are highly attuned to this issue. And I strongly suspect that if any producer had actually used a synthetic without telling us, we would have heard that not once, but dozens of times. So there's no indication that producers are simply not telling us. I think that we have a long-standing bargaining relationship with these companies. They understand that they have to do business with us, and they are going to have to do business with us tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. And so if they think they're going to get away with something by failing to comply with the agreement today, I think they understand they're going to pay for that tomorrow, the next day, and on down the line. I really do not suspect that it is the case that studios have simply been doing it and not telling us. We would have heard, and they would be extremely unwise to take that approach.
I agree with that. And I also just want to point out that the contract from 2023 provides that we have a right to meet with those companies on a biannual, twice annual basis, and we have been doing that. So in those meetings, we get a full report from them on their activities related to generative AI, et cetera. So it's not like they're just sitting there keeping their head down and quietly hoping we don't notice what they're doing. They are regularly having to articulate for us precisely what they are doing, and then that gives us a baseline from which to sort of scrutinize their activities more if we need to raise concerns if there are concerns to be raised, et cetera. Okay, next question. Can you please expand upon the new good faith virtual casting expansion? Can you give us some examples of what that will look like and how or if it can be enforced?
Sure. So right now, there's a requirement that when they're requesting self-tapes, they have to make a period of time available for people who want to audition virtually. What we have been advised over the W&W process in the term of the agreement is that those audition windows that are being provided are insufficient, and that for most of the performers, their experience has been that by the time they go to try to schedule themselves into that window, all the available slots are gone. So we came into this negotiation, with a goal of giving everyone who wanted the opportunity to audition virtually that ability. They are going to make a good faith attempt, and we are going to hold them to it to make those audition opportunities available to everyone who wants one for certain types of TV roles that are listed out in the summary. And if that is not happening, then you need to get in touch with us, and we need to get in touch with the AMPTP and with the producer of that particular show, and we need to get that fixed. I think the fix is going to be make those audition slots available. So there may be maybe an adjustment period in the early going. I think producers are concerned that this is actually a very big change to the casting process as it presently exists. We think it's a big change too. It's a big change to the benefit of our members, many of whom don't prefer to self-tape. So won't be too surprised if there are some issues that we have to pursue in the early going of this as this change is navigated. But again, the producers know we're coming back to this issue in the next agreement. They have every incentive to make sure that we're satisfied with this, lest we have to negotiate even further improvements to this language. So keep us informed. If you see these issues emerging, do keep us informed. We will be on top of it, and we'll work together with the membership to ensure that this is effectuated. You're muted, Duncan.
Thank you. Next question is, will the merged pension and retirement plan still include an alternate qualification with days as exists with the current SAG plan? And the answer to that is yes. Next, how do you track digital replicas for residuals? Ray, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, the same way you would track any other performance, basically. You're not really tracking the digital replica. You are tracking the performance that was created using the digital replica. So we would treat that performance as though it were done by a person, and the same monitoring services that we have for determining what the exploitation of that movie or TV show was will help us to ascertain where the residuals are due for the replica performance as well.
Great. Next, thank you all for such a great contract. I'm currently receiving both my SAG pension and after retirement. Will these be combined into one payment now? Most likely not. I want to be clear that you will still receive both of those pensions going forward, even under a merged plan. It is yet to be determined whether that would happen in a single payment or in separate payments, but whatever the result of that is, the combined total would be the same as the two separate totals are now added together. So I just want to be very clear. No one's going to receive any less than they are receiving now, and possibly more, depending upon exactly where you fall in the maximum pension scenario on the SAG pension side. So yeah, but whether it'll be like one payment, separate payments, that's to be determined, and will be answered later. Next, thank you for your, oh no, wait, thank you for your hard work. In regard to days for health insurance, days are frozen, meaning what exactly? And in regard to pension and pension qualifying going up, are days still going to be an option to obtain a pension credit? Thanks again. So frozen meaning that the qualification is not going to increase, even though the other method of qualifying, which is the eligibility threshold, is going to increase. And yes, we expect the days, the alternative days option to continue to be available in a merged pension plan, and the qualification level for that, likewise, we do not expect that to go up, and will be reviewed as well by the trustees as part of determining if the alternative days threshold numbers are appropriate or not. Next, I'd like to know how or if the gains and high budget SVOD residuals apply to Peacock, since NBC shows are often exhibited there the day after they air on linear.
So when NBC show airs on linear, that started on linear moves to Peacock, it triggers a residual. That residual is the 3.6% residual that we were discussing earlier. And so that will actually be an improved residual because we changed how that residual is divvied up. So it is not subject to the high budget SVOD formula. It's a different formula, but there is a payment triggered when that happens.
Unmuted. How will the union enforce not having to pay for headshot and reel submission, i.e., how does this apply to the most commonly used platforms, casting networks, and actors access? Further, does this provision apply to both principal and background performers?
It does apply. There's a limitation with respect to background as well. How will we, I think I responded to this earlier, but in terms of how we will enforce it, we know that the AMPTP is already in discussions with some of these platforms to bring their practices into compliance with what we've bargained. If we have to pursue grievances, we will. But I think the likelier result is that we're going to sit down with each of these platforms, not just by ourselves as the union, but with the support of the AMPTP, who is the representative of all their biggest clients, to make sure that they adjust their practices to be in compliance with the agreement.
Okay. Next is, what does it mean by producers agree to a principle strongly favoring human performances? It sounds good, but legally, does this actually help us, and how? What does it mean by a principle?
Right. I think it affects the way you do the analysis of whether there is significant additional value generated by the use of a synthetic. They're obligated to show that there is significant additional value, and they are obligated to do that in light of their strong principle favoring human performance. In other words, a tie does not go to the synthetic, a tie goes to the human. And more than just a tie goes to the human. Unless you really are achieving something very meaningful out of using the synthetic as opposed to a human or a digital replica, that strong principle means you're meant to use a human performer. And if we have to arbitrate, for example, that significant additional advantage standard, we're going to be arguing to the arbitrator that they should apply it accordingly. They should apply it in a way that recognizes that they ought to be strongly favoring human performance. So it makes the standard that producers have to clear that much higher.
Great. Next is, since 2012, when SAG and AFTRA merged, membership was told that the merging of the pension plans was not legally possible. Can you explain how those legal obstacles were resolved for this negotiation that could not be done earlier? So I first want to say, in 2012, when we had the merger process, the contrary information was given. It was not that it was not legally possible. In fact, there was a feasibility study done, and it was reported through the informational meetings, et cetera, that it was legally possible to merge the plans, but that it might be challenging from a practical point of view to do that and would take time. I think those statements were true, but maybe underestimated even how hard it would be from a practical point of view and how long it would take. Obviously, it's been 14 years since that time. Trustees of both plans have made multiple efforts over that 14-year period. But what really I think was the breakthrough here is having a bargaining partner in the AMPTP who was willing to engage on this topic and engage in a meaningful way. The ability to move this plan forward obviously required additional funding into the pension, the new merged pension plan that you see in the form of a 1% contribution rate increase in this deal. It also required cooperation from management in being willing to take the steps necessary to get there. And so that is a heavy lift. It is one that our negotiating committee, committed to and made happen through the process of these negotiations. And now there is a pathway and a plan for doing it. So I think all of us who've been around for a while certainly wish this could have happened earlier. I don't know if it would have been possible, but it certainly would have been much more difficult in an ANPTP that did not have the vibe that's been described in the negotiations. I think Sean's mentioned it. I'll also say there's a different approach to these negotiations in terms of how the AMPTP has been interacting with us, and I believe also with other unions that have been dealing with them recently. So the change in leadership there, I think, was part of the reason why this was possible. And I think it has the benefit of being something that's really hard to achieve, but when achieved, will bear fruit for our members for many, many, many years and decades into the future. I don't know, Ray, if you want to say anything else about that. If I missed anything.
I'll just add that. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I would just add that, they really wanted this. They didn't like what was happening with the way they were being administered. They felt like there was that it was inefficient. Let's use that one word. So, in all negotiations, by the way, I just can't stand that I can't see the members. I'm just like looking at a picture of myself. It's really irritating. These things get solved when management is ready to pay for it. Management stepped up, they paid for it, and it took the goodwill and expertise of a lot of people. I don't think you mentioned yet that maybe you did, that the trustees of both plans came in and looked at it, evaluated it. We got to see, hear, and feel what their disposition was to this, and it was unanimous. And the what do you call them? The actuarials and all of that sort of stuff. So this is a long, awaited promise being fulfilled. So and it's not simple. It's really, really complicated, but it's a signature achievement for the union at this moment. So put that out there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. The trustees did for both plans communicated with and met with the negotiating committee during the bargaining process to weigh in and give us their feedback on the proposal and the concept. So I think that's a great point, Sean. I'm glad you made it. Okay. Our next question is, how are we enforcing live Zoom opportunities being made available? I'm glad we got a bolstered commitment, but I'm unclear on the difference between this and the last contract.
Yeah, I think in the early going, this is going to be a process of working with the AMPTP and working with casting directors to make sure it happens. They are committed to doing it. We are committed to making them do it. We have the opportunity to use the grievance and arbitration process at a certain point if we need to. And so that is, that's the way the contract gets enforced. I think in this case, there should be a real emphasis on trying to work cooperatively with casting directors and producers to make this change happen. And I think the members are going to play a big role in this too. I mean, we really rely on you as being the eyes and ears of the union. And if you see that it's not happening, call us right away. I mean, I think the ideal case is you call us right away and we call that casting director and we make it happen on the spot for that job, rather than trying to pursue some kind of remedy after the fact. So we really, again, I can't stress that enough, that if you are in that circumstance, please get in touch with us as quickly as possible. You're going to play a critical role as well in helping us navigate this change.
Okay. Next question. Regarding combined pension and retirement plans, you've said performers who are already vested will be fine, and those who have 3 years and after plan will hopefully be granted vesting. How will transferring to the new plan work for performers who are not yet vested in either plan? Example, how does it work for someone who has 4 years toward vesting in the SAG program and 2 years towards vesting in the AFTRA program work? So that's a great question. The actual mechanics of how that is going to work are going to be determined by the bargaining parties as part of the fleshing out of the details of this and the trustees of each plan, especially because it's not specified in your question, but what's unclear is whether there are years of those 4 in SAG and 2 in AFTRA that overlap with each other. Because if there are years that overlap with each other, that may be a different answer. So the bottom line is that you won't lose credit that you have earned in either plan, but if you're not vested in either plan at the time of the merger, then you'll be in a position of continuing to earn additional credits to meet the vesting requirement. And that requirement will be based upon the SAG plan structure as it is now. So that would mean that there will be a 5-year vesting, there'll be a 10-year vesting, and there'll be credit for years that you've already accumulated that haven't already resulted in you receiving a vested pension or benefit. So more details than that will be worked out during that 18-month window between the contract start and the effective date of the merger of the plans. And there are countless details that will have to be worked out that aren't specified in this, but the core framework has already been laid out, which is the SAG plan benefit structure, and the funding for the plan, as Sean mentioned earlier, has been reviewed by the actuary consultants, and their projections show that the plan will be more than adequately funded going forward in a merged plan position. So, great. Next. I'm very pleased that we're getting advance notice of walkaway lunches. Another thing I'd hoped to get was advance notice of the time of the scheduled meal break. Did that come up in the discussion? Are we getting that too? If not, why not?
I do not believe that that is one of the background achievements. I think there was some discussion around getting a workday breakdown into the mix, similar to what we know has been provided at times or used to be provided perhaps by central casting. My recollection is that did not make its way into the final deal. So if that is a desire of the community, that should continue to be raised in wages and working conditions, so that we can make that a future achievement.
Great. Next is, will this contract do away with the fees members are required to pay for access to work through third-party online casting platforms like Actors Access, Casting Networks, etc.? Does paying to post multiple headshots and reels fall under the umbrella of being charged for access, or will average members still be paying $800 plus annually, as we are now, to be considered for work?
So we're going to create the opportunity for people to submit their headshots and reels, as well as their self-tape that was handled in 2023 without paying fees. So, that's not to say that people cannot choose to remain subscribers to these third-party casting platforms, and continue to avail themselves of the convenience of how those platforms work. But what we have changed is that there has to be an ability for you to see the casting notice, submit a self-tape, submit a headshot, submit a reel, so that you can in effect apply for that job without having to pay that third-party casting platform. You're muted, Duncan.
I hit the mute button by accident. What happens to the current funds in the success bonus? Is it in an escrow fund collecting interest? And if so, will that interest get dispersed to participants as well? 5% APR on $20 million is $1 million, which is not an insignificant amount.
Yes, it's maintained in an interest-bearing account. I don't know if it's technically an escrow account. And ultimately that interest will be paid out. There are administrative expenses of the fund, so I don't want to say that 100% of every dollar that goes into the fund gets paid out to members. But once you take those administrative expenses into consideration, yes, the idea is that the fund is going to be paid out. It's not there to collect and get bigger. So it's there to be paid out, and the interest is part of the money that will be calculated for payout.
Part of the money that'll be calculated for payout and or used to defray administrative costs that would otherwise be deducted from the sums that are in the plan. So absolutely. Next question. In 39E, why the caveat in the parentheticals? It makes 39A irrelevant. Our biometric data is no one's business, and J makes it moot. It is not necessary for production to have any scanning of our biometric data, especially as SB 384, as of 2017, makes 19A moot as well. 39H is too vague and is unacceptable, as the performer should own their digital replica and can lease their own name, image, likeness to whoever wants to license it. So that's a lot of questions in there, Ram. Maybe we should go through them in chunks. At 39E, why the caveat in the parentheticals?
Right. I mean, the caveat in the parenthetical is just meant to acknowledge the fact that there may be a door somewhere that you open with a fingerprint. It's not to say that they get to therefore keep your fingerprint and use it for any other purpose. It's just to make clear that this provision does not require them to go change that lock in order to use a different kind of lock. So it does not detract in any meaningful way from the protection that's being offered there.
Okay, the next sentence says it makes 39A irrelevant, and I presume this person is writing about 39J makes it moot. Do you want to say anything about 39A making it irrelevant or 39J making it moot?
Well, 39A says you have protection for no scan digital replicas. So, 39A literally it's describing a scenario where you were not scanned, where you performed just as you ordinarily would for retention of principal photography on a picture. So I don't see how that would apply to or undermine a prohibition on using your biometric data for unrelated purposes. Would seem like that's a scenario where your biometric data is less likely to be captured in the first place. And then with 39J, the articulable business reason requirement, articulable business reason. Yeah, I don't think those provisions particularly work together. I think they're just separate requirements.
Good. Okay. I think the rest of it was mostly a statement, so I think we're good there. Next, this is a question about healthcare. I'm listed as quote unquote retired because I'm not earning enough in new work to be considered active. Because of my years of coverage, I'm able to cover my family under SAG-AFTRA by taking a Medicare Plus policy through the portal. Besides the increase in monthly premiums, will this contract affect my ability to keep my family covered?
I don't believe so, no.
No, I mean, this contract really isn't making any changes to the operation of the health plan other than with respect to the premium increase and the temporary increase in the eligibility threshold percentage. So there's no reason why this contract would impact that. Okay, next, legal question on copyright and Section 39K. If it is copyrighted content, how is that considered fair use? Doesn't fair use just mean it's available on the internet for free? And certainly most film and TV shows would not be in that bucket. No, fair use and copyright do interact. Fair use is an exception or limitation to copyright rights that copyright owners have. I don't know if maybe you're possibly thinking about things that are in the public domain, which is a completely different concept than fair use. Public domain material, there is no copyright on, and anyone can freely make use of it. But the arguments that most of the AI companies who've been sued or that's going on in most of the litigation about this are arguments surrounding fair use, essentially saying that it is a permissible exception to copyright to train a generative AI system on that material and that it does not constitute infringement, even though the underlying copyright's validity is not being disputed. So hope that answers the question. Next is when it says producers do not intend to use a synthetic in a human role, what does that translate to legally? There's a lot of good directional strides in the AI section, but I'm concerned and uncertain about the legality and enforceability of most of it. I don't know if you want to take that, Ray, or you want me to.
I mean, I could start and say I don't have a concern that this is not legally enforceable. And certainly the human role provision would not undermine the ability to enforce this language. So I think we should have confidence that we can enforce the language that we're bargaining.
I just need to ask, I'm getting a lot of static when Ray's talking. I don't know if others are hearing that, or maybe that's just a problem in my connection. So we'll keep testing, but
How
I'm
about
hearing
now?
it too.
okay, it's better now, Ray. I don't know what
Yeah,
happened.
if it happens, tell me. If I mute and unmute, it solves the problem. I don't know why.
Okay, magical. Maybe AI should figure out how to solve that problem. Okay. Next is, does the synthetic language protect ADR loopers? And can you clarify if the union would take the position that the use of a synthetic voice to do ADR looping would trigger the GAI provisions of the agreement? Thank you.
Yeah, I believe the answer is yes.
Yeah, agree. Okay, next, for section 39C on AI and ICDRs, how does a day rate work for a digital replica? How are the number of days it quote unquote worked determined? Is it just a single day or multiple? Seems like it could just be up to the producer and they'd probably just want to say one.
Well, it is just one in this case. I mean, that if for an employment-based digital replica, the producer is required to do a good faith estimate that we can challenge for how many days you would have had to work. This is a little different. This is more like the reuse of photography provision, where it sets the day rate as the minimum for a negotiation on the right to use that clip. It's more like that. It's one day rate that's the floor for bargaining for the ability to use the ICDR. It's not that you're doing the same estimate of how many days it would have taken you as an individual to do the work that was instead done with your ICDR. That's true for employment-based digital replicas. This is different. It's just the day rate, whatever it is the floor for bargaining for that use.
Okay, great answer. Next, did the National Board see on paper the financial effects of voting yes to the AFTRA pension merger with the SAG pension? Can the membership see on paper the financial effects of this merger? Example, currently the ANPTP has to bail out the AFTRA pension if it goes bankrupt. Under the new agreement, who handles the pension bailout? Oh, there's a lot in there. So first of all, the SAG-AFTRA National Board did see, I won't say it's on paper because we actually do our materials through digital means now. We don't distribute physical paper as a general rule, but they did see a slide that showed the horizon analysis, the actuarial analysis of the merged plan, showing the actuary's projection of what the funding level of the plan would be for the next 17 years, I believe it is, after the date of the anticipated merger date of the plan. Can the members see that? I will have to figure out a mechanism for doing that for that material, but I'm sure that the substance of it can be presented in some way. And then there's a statement, currently the ANPTP has to bail out the AFTRA pension if it goes bankrupt. So first of all, let's just say there is no one who is concerned that the AFTRA retirement fund is going to go bankrupt. If people are out there saying that, that's an irresponsible thing to say because that is absolutely not true and that is not the case. If a defined benefit plan, if a multi-employer pension plan, for example, starts to have financial trouble where it falls into one of the non-green zones under the Pension Protection Act, each zone, which there are different zones, yellow, orange, red, depends on what the statistics, the funding statistics and other statistics of the plan have different implications about what has to happen. But I do want to make clear that for anybody who thinks that the result of a plan going into one of those other zones is that it just becomes the employer's problem by themselves to solve this issue and that they just have to fund the plan more, that is not an accurate statement of what happens. What actually happens is that the trustees of the plan have to work on a funding rehabilitation plan, and that funding rehabilitation plan will typically include elements of additional employer contributions, but will also include benefit reductions. So it is not something to be desired to have a plan go into one of those zones as a way of extracting more contributions from the employer. The right way to extract more contributions to the employer is exactly what we did in this negotiation, which is bargain for them and achieve them. So in this negotiation, we have an additional 1% on the contribution rate that will be contributed to the new merged plan starting on its effective date. And that is how you want to get more money into the plan. Now, I want to note that additional 1% is primarily being used for the purpose of increasing the benefit in the SAG side of that plan. That's how the $96,000 maximum pension can go up to $108,000, is because of the majority of that 1% contribution rate. So it's not actually, there's no bailout involved on any side here. There is a opportunity for us to ultimately bring the plans together to end the split earnings problem, and to deliver a single unified set of benefits going forward to our union's members who work across our varied contracts. So, so I just think it's important to have those statistics there and to note that and I think I said this before, but if I didn't, the merged plan is projected to cross into over 100% funding by 2035 and to 116.5% funding by 2040. So this is a merger that this plan will be on a trajectory to not only be fully funded, but to be more than fully funded within the projection period, and remains in the green zone under the Pension Protection Act for the entire time under those projections. Okay, Ray, you want to add anything to that?
No.
All right, next question. I currently have 4 pension credits in the after retirement fund, with the rest being in SAG pension. If I don't earn a 5th pension credit by the time the plans merge, will those AFTRA pension credits automatically be added to my SAG credits in total? This one may require some individual evaluation, because what's not clear from your question is, are you already taking a pension in the SAG plan? And do you have enough credits in the SAG plan to have vested in the SAG pension fully already? It's a little unclear to me from the language, but as a general matter, the credits that you have earned in the past in either plan will be there for you when we transition into the merged plan. There will be rules that will be determined through the bargaining parties and through the trustees about exactly how those interact. And I particularly note that where those credits overlap in the same year is maybe a special case as well. But we're going to have to provide more details on that as the implementation of the merger process rolls out. Next question, can you list the deal points we did not get from the AMPTP? Well, I love that question, and I know at least 1 or 2 members of the negotiating committee who love that question too, and rightly so. We had, at least by my count, and Ray, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, I think we had at least 11 major proposals from the AMPTP that we successfully fought off during the course of the negotiations. I have 4 of them that I particularly would like to highlight. The number 1 of them being my favorite, that we did not have to agree to, that we successfully fought off, which was French hours. And I say it's my favorite only because it's such a misnomer, in the sense that, you imagine this very, I don't know, French hours, it sounds like something elegant and fantastic and oh, ooh la la. But what French hours means, for those who aren't familiar with it, is basically, instead of having actual fixed meal times, you kind of have food available and you just kind of take a break to have lunch whenever circumstances permit. And hopefully they permit. So that's not something that we were found appealing, at least not for the productions that would be made under this contract. It might be more suitable in a different cultural environment or, in other circumstances. So our committee was very firm on that, and we fought that off. We also fought off a proposal for low budget terms for television. We fought off a proposal for increasing drop pickups. We wanted to decrease them, but we fought off the contrary proposal from the employers. And the employers wanted to reduce the background numbers. And as you know, as Ray explained earlier, we actually were able to not only fight that proposal off, but increase them during the term of the agreement. Are there any other ones that you want to highlight, Ray or Sean or Jessica?
Well, I do want to note that it was messaged to me that the question was actually, what did we propose and not get? Is that not how you read it, Duncan?
That's not how I read it, but that we can also try to talk about that. I was under the other interpretation of that question. So if I misinterpreted
Well, you know what? I mean, I know Jessica made a list. Jessica, do you have that list handy?
I do. Yeah.
Can you just rattle through the ones Duncan didn't talk about?
Yeah, they were looking for lagging salary rates for some new episodic content, shorter periods of intervening days in drop pickups, in addition to the more drop pickups that Duncan mentioned, an ability to cancel written calls without payment, additional exceptions to 12-hour turnarounds that currently exist, expansion of the relocation allowance provision to miniseries, creation of a 15-mile zone in New York, reductions in the background actor counts. I think you might have mentioned that. Shortening of the time period to file some claims for background actors, elimination of the night premiums in X2, and additional caps on late fees.
So that's the list of things the AMPTP tried to achieve but didn't. As far as the things that we tried to achieve but didn't, I will just say I don't have a list of that handy. I don't think any of us does. What I would want to say about that is we brought an extraordinarily comprehensive package of proposals to the table. And we did so with a strategic goal in mind of extracting as much as we could out of the negotiation, but with the express understanding that was made clear to and agreed to by the negotiating committee that we knew that we weren't going to achieve all of it and that we weren't going to evaluate this deal by looking at the things that we didn't achieve because we made so many proposals that that would not be a viable way really to analyze the merit of this deal. So we had an understanding going in that we, in effect, we weren't going to do this analysis on the other side. We were going to focus on the things we gained and not on the things we didn't because of just the sheer number of proposals that we brought.
I'm not. Oh, sorry. I'm not squeamish about thinking about this. We went through the couple-month W&W process, and there were thousands. I don't think it's overstating it to say it, but thousands of unique concepts dealing with different issues. And the plenary group, the committee had during the plenary process, which we spent many days on, and it was it's like excruciating when you don't bring stuff forward that's worthy. So, there's a bunch of stuff that we went for and didn't get. So I don't know what the list looks like at the moment, but that the pain of that process continues. And so we'll come back and fight again the next time and fight again in the other contracts. But yeah, I think Duncan makes this point a bunch where you don't know what they're going to respond to exactly. You might be able to make headway in an area that you didn't realize. Or you may think you're going to have an easy time of it, and they for whatever reason, a lot of times having to do with the fact that in their room there's totally different kinds of companies who totally do different business models, trying to have to agree with each other, and so you end up getting a roadblock on something you want. So yeah, detail's important, but I think Ray said it.
Yeah, well said. And I mean, I certainly agree with that. And that's a topic we talked about with the committee repeatedly, is the fact that, if we're not making sure our reach exceeds our grasp, then we're not trying hard enough. And that means we aren't being certain that we're getting everything that we can get in these negotiations. So thanks for the question. Next one is, can you give an idea of what the residual pay bump on AVOD streaming shows will look like? For example, I was a guest star in a 1-hour drama filmed in 2021 and aired in 2022. What can I expect to receive in compensation? An estimated amount is probably hard to give, I'd imagine, but it would really help me to understand this achievement.
Did you say AVOD?
Yeah, AVOD.
I don't think the AVOD residuals changed. I see Jen has come on, so maybe she has an answer.
Yeah, maybe I can help. So when you're talking about a television program that's moved to AVOD, the first year residuals change. So for new shows, they go up when scale goes up. But for shows that were released previously, we didn't make any changes to that residual specifically. What you were hearing in the summary of the MOA was that shows that are made for initial exhibition on AVOD that are high budget, some of those terms lag an agreement behind. So they were made in 2023, but pushed back to some of the 2020 terms. That is getting moved up so that if there's a new high budget AVOD show done during the 2026 term, it'll have a lot of the same obligations and formulas that are applicable to the 2026 agreement. Certain terms, though, that lagged are moving up from being the 2020 terms to being 2023 terms. I think that's a little bit of a confusion regarding a TV show that's getting streaming in AVOD versus new productions that are high budget being made for initial exhibition in AVOD.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Jen. Jennifer Gaudry, head of residuals, and I was your official executive director of contract enforcement and strategy or something like that. I'm sorry if I got it slightly wrong, but residuals guru, among other things. Next is, I really appreciate all the work you all have done, and I hope to get to work with someday. Back to tracking for residuals with synthetics or replicas. Can you explain how you do that for performances already? Do you go through call sheets and scan records, etc.? How does it work?
We get a final cast list from producers. That's what's verified. And that final cast list is compared to the residuals payment data that accompanies the checks when they are processed by us. So those are the items of information that we are able to use. There are monitoring services that allow us to check what the exploitation was of the picture, make sure that, for example, there aren't runs that were not included in the residuals calculation. So those are some of the data sources that are used to verify what we're getting paid.
Great, thank you. Next question. I know one of the things I brought up in the wages and working conditions meetings was the push to get cities like Chicago to be zoned. What was the update?
There are no changes to the background zones. That was not one of the things that we were able to achieve for background. As a reminder, we are confronted with the argument by the AMPTP that those are non-mandatory subjects of bargaining, meaning it's not something you can strike over. Those are particularly difficult and complicated things to try to achieve. We have managed to achieve some zone improvements over the years. We got a New Mexico zone in the Netflix agreement. In the past, in my time here, we've been able to expand upon several zones in Sacramento and in Las Vegas. But in this cycle, there were no new zones added.
All right. Next is, wouldn't allowing subscription-based casting tiers, which will probably have additional advantageous benefits excluded from the free tier, mean that actors with the resources to spend will have an advantage over actors without those resources? Doesn't this just create even more inequity? And I'll start out by just saying to that, we have provisions in the contract that specifically establish that they cannot allow somebody based on a subscription or a payment to get preferential access or treatment in the submission of, submission for consideration for roles. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't offer convenience services and other things by subscription, and obviously they do. But wherever there is a casting service where SAG-AFTRA covered projects are being cast, for those projects, there must be a mechanism for you to be considered on an absolutely equal basis without having to pay for them. And that is what, we will be looking to enforce. And I don't know, Ray, if you want to add more to that.
All I'll add is, I'll add two things. One is, we do have to remember that these casting platforms are legal businesses and they are not signed to our contract. So our ability to directly regulate their business practices, we have to work through the employers and through their clients in order to influence what they're doing. So that does mean there's going to be a limit to the level of detailed regulation that we're able to make in that space. A, and B is, we did get an on-the-record commitment from the AMPTP that they would be supportive if we approach the IACF, the Industry Advancement Cooperative Fund, which is a fund that we have, for funding for potentially acquiring, establishing, operating a casting platform directly that the union would have much more influence over. And that might be a circumstance where, we could provide the functionality that might be advantageous to a subscriber in a way that's much more accessible and doesn't raise the same issues as the current environment. So we have the provisions that we have that are very meaningful and allow you to submit for free, but we also have medium and longer term plans for how to improve that even more.
Okay, next. Why would you allow any biometric data to be taken, even for a lock? They can buzz the door or open when we knock. Please take this caveat out of the contract. Well, I mean, I'll just say I don't think that we can dictate to them that they can't use a biometric lock if that's what's available on the facility in question. So that is a common procedure that is in use today in a lot of different settings. So I understand your concern, and we certainly did limit the use of any biometric data beyond those very few specific areas, but I don't think that's an area where we would have been successful, frankly, in attempting to further limit it. So next is, okay, so if a digital replica is only given a single day's pay for use, while the actual physical human performer would be paid for multiple days, is that not enabling the producer to use our own digital replica to undercut our own pay? Thanks.
Well, they have to negotiate with you for that right. They don't have that right automatically. And they, right now, what they have to do is consent, and there is no minimum for bargaining. So we are moving in the direction that you want us to in terms of establishing at least a floor for that negotiation. And, we'll say we're unfamiliar with any circumstance that has arisen over the past 3 years where someone to their disadvantage has been replaced by their own independently created digital replica. Some of the digital replica deals that we've become familiar with are actually quite remunerative for the performer involved, and typically involve people who are no longer able to perform. Look, if that's a concern, that's not a concern that has materialized yet. If it does materialize, we will have to rebargain that provision or find other ways of dealing with it.
All right. And our last question is actually someone clarifying that the previous AVOD question was actually meant to be about SVOD. And is it possible to answer the same question for SVOD? I don't know if Jen can.
Well, if you are on a television show or a theatrical motion picture that moves to a streaming platform, on average, your residual is going to be 5% higher as a result of this deal than it was before. I don't have a percentage for what the net improvement would be for an SVOD program repeating or remaining available on the platform. We did, as we mentioned, we improved the ceilings at the front end of that formula, and we improved the foreign tier. So it will depend on how much you made. Were you already hitting the ceiling, in which case that ceiling improvement will benefit you. If you weren't already hitting the ceiling, it won't benefit you. It will depend on whether your show is being made available on a related and affiliated foreign platform to benefit from the improvement to that foreign tier. So, I mean, those are some of the factors, but I do not have a number. I see Jen's image becoming brighter. So if you want to provide more detail, Jen, please do.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify the high budget SVOD improvement to the ceiling and the foreign subscriber factor are only going to be applicable to new productions. But the example of the TV program that moved over to SVOD and that improvement, where I think you said it was a show that was released in 2022. So if you're talking about a TV show, you will see the benefit of this improvement for TV shows that go to SVOD, because we got a reach back, which doesn't happen very often. It'll be when it has a new license. So the existing use on SVOD, they'll have to have a new license either to a different SVOD service or renew the one that it's on currently. Either way, you will see that improvement because we got to reach back on that one.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And with that, I want to just thank everyone for joining us and for all of the great questions. As a reminder, if you had a question that didn't get answered today, or if you think of a new question, you can send your questions at any time to TV Theatrical 2026 at SAGAFTRA.org. We have a number of additional informational meetings scheduled. There are 2 more national meetings. One is tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. There's also one on Thursday, May 28th, also at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, so you can come to one of those. There'll be a New York local meeting on Thursday, May 26th at 4 p.m. Eastern, followed by a Los Angeles local meeting on Wednesday, May 27th at 6 p.m. Pacific. And there'll be a meeting for the mid-size and small-size locals on Thursday, May 28th at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. You can visit sagaftra.org/contracts2026 for a detailed summary of the tentative agreement and for more information. And most importantly, voting opens on Thursday, May 14th after 5 p.m. Pacific time. And all members who are eligible to vote will receive a postcard in the mail with voting instructions. So keep your eye out for those. And please, please make sure you vote before 5 p.m. Pacific time on Thursday, June 4th. Again, thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you soon at one of the next informational meetings. Bye.